You don't fall asleep. That's the first lie your brain has been telling you since childhood. You don't cross a line. You don't shut down. There is no clean moment where consciousness clicks off and sleep begins. What actually happens is quieter, more unsettling. You start disappearing. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, function by function, layer by layer, while you're still there enough to notice something is wrong. Right now, as you listen to this, you may think you know what sleep feels like. Heavy eyelids, slower thoughts, that familiar slide into darkness. But none of that is sleep. That's just the beginning of the brain letting go of you. And tonight, instead of rushing past that moment, we're going to stay inside it. Long enough to feel what usually goes unnoticed. Long enough to watch the mind turn its own lights off, one room at a time. Before we go any further, do this one thing for me. If you want to understand what's actually happening to you every single night, if you want to hear this all the way through, from the first crack in awareness to the moment you can no longer tell where you end, like the video, subscribe, and stay with Sleepy Scientist Recordings, because once this process begins, there is no clear way back. Most people believe sleep is a single event, a switch, awake, then gone. But your brain doesn't work in switches. It works in systems, and systems don't shut down politely. They withdraw, slowly, unevenly, sometimes clumsily. One part steps back, while another keeps talking. One region dims, while another keeps firing, trying to make sense of what's happening. That's why the last few minutes before sleep feel strange in a way you've never been able to explain. Thoughts repeat themselves. Logic feels slippery. Time stretches or collapses. You know you're tired, but you're still here. That's not an accident. That's not weakness. That's the sound of your brain negotiating which parts of you it can afford to lose first. Because sleep is not rest. Sleep is reorganization. And reorganization requires letting go of control. The unsettling part is this. Your brain does not ask permission before it starts. It begins with the parts of you that make the most noise during the day. The parts that argue, plan, judge, worry. Those parts are expensive. They burn energy. They demand constant input. And when night comes, the brain quietly decides they've done enough. You can feel this decision if you pay attention. It's the moment when a thought starts strong and then fades halfway through the sentence. The moment when you try to solve a problem you've solved 1,000 times before and suddenly it feels slightly out of reach. Not impossible, just distant. That distance is important because distance means separation. Your brain is beginning to separate thinking from being. And that separation is where things start to bend. Have you ever noticed how memories behave at night? Not long-term memories. Those stay buried, but short ones. The kind you were just holding. A thought comes in. You follow it for a second, and then it's gone. Not forgotten in the normal sense. Just ungraspable. You know it was there. You can feel the shape of it, but you can't pull it back. That's not distraction. That's a system slowly losing its grip on continuity. Continuity is what makes you feel like a single, uninterrupted self. And continuity is one of the first things your brain is willing to sacrifice. Time is next. In the minutes before sleep, time stops behaving like time. 5 minutes can feel like 30, or 30 can disappear entirely. You might check the clock, close your eyes, open them again, and be shocked that only 2 minutes have passed. Or worse, that 20 minutes are gone and you don't remember them. This isn't time speeding up or slowing down. This is your brain losing its internal metronome, the mechanism that orders events, sequences, thoughts, and keeps you anchored to before and after is starting to dissolve. And when time loses structure, the self begins to loosen. Because the self is not a thing. It's a process. A process that depends on memory, sequence, logic, and attention all working together. When one of those starts to fail, the whole structure wobbles. This is the part most people rush through. They distract themselves. They scroll. They force sleep. But if you stay here long enough, if you don't fight it, you'll notice something quietly unsettling. The voice in your head changes. Not the words. The tone. It becomes slower, softer, less certain. Sentences don't end cleanly anymore. They trail off. They overlap. Sometimes, they don't even feel like they belong to you. That's because the part of your brain that labels thoughts as mine is already pulling away. Ownership is optional at night. Your brain doesn't need you to claim every thought in order to shut down safely, so it stops checking. Thoughts begin to appear without introduction, without explanation, without a narrator standing behind them. They simply arrive and leave. This is where many people feel a flicker of unease. Because if thoughts can happen without you, what exactly is you doing here? That question usually doesn't get finished. Not because it's answered, but because the system that would normally hold it steady is already weakening. And this is still not sleep. This is only the early phase of withdrawal. Your body begins to follow. You feel heavier, but not in a muscular way. It's more like the edges of your body are becoming less precise. Hands feel distant. Legs lose definition. The space between your shoulders and the mattress becomes ambiguous. Your brain keeps a detailed map of your body at all times. At night, it stops updating that map as frequently, not because something is wrong, but because accuracy is no longer necessary. You don't need fine-grained awareness to lie still in the dark. So the map blurs. And when the map blurs, the boundary between inside and outside softens. You're still here, but you're less sharply outlined. This is the moment when many people say they drift, but drifting implies movement. What's actually happening is subtraction. Less monitoring, less correction, less self-reference. You are not going anywhere. You are becoming thinner. And here's the part almost no one talks about. There is a brief window where you are aware that awareness itself is changing. You can sense that something fundamental is being altered, but you can't describe it. It feels like standing on the edge of a thought you're not allowed to finish. This is not fear. It's unfamiliarity. Your brain has never evolved to explain this moment to you, because once it progresses a little further, there is no one left to receive the explanation. That's why it feels so difficult to remember later. That's why every night feels like the first time. In the next stage, something critical happens. The idea of a central observer begins to loosen. There are still sensations, still images, still fragments of thought, but they no longer organize themselves around a single point. No one is clearly watching. No one is clearly choosing. This is the threshold, not between wake and sleep, but between I am experiencing and experience is happening. Most people pass through this so quickly they never notice it. But once you've noticed it once, it becomes impossible to unfeel. And that's where we'll go next. Because if this process continues, if the brain keeps turning itself down in this specific order, what disappears after logic, after time, after memory, after the sense of ownership, what is the last thing to go? And when it goes, who is left to notice? That's where we're heading. The brain does not sleep as a whole. That idea is comforting, simple, and completely wrong. If the brain truly shut down all at once, you would feel it. There would be a moment of collapse, a clean break, a sudden absence. But that never happens. Instead, the brain behaves like a city at night. Not the dramatic kind, where all the lights go out together, but the ordinary kind, where neighborhoods dim at different hours, where some streets fall silent while others stay awake, where activity doesn't end, it just relocates. Right now, even as your eyes rest and your body lies still, parts of your brain are still busy. Not dreaming yet, not resting, just active in quieter ways. Other parts, however, are already stepping back. This unevenness is not a flaw. It is the design. Because different parts of the brain exist for different kinds of survival, and not all of them are needed at night. The brain knows this, so it begins to prioritize. The first regions to dim are not the ones that keep you alive. Breathing stays precise. Heart rhythm remains steady. Basic regulation continues without interruption. What fades first are the regions that keep you aware. Not awareness itself, not yet, but the machinery that supports it. During the day, these systems are relentless. They scan, compare, predict, evaluate. They ask questions like, what does this mean? What should I do next? How does this affect me? These questions are useful when you're awake. They are exhausting when you're tired. So when night arrives, the brain doesn't force them offline. It simply stops refueling them. And without fuel, activity changes character. You might notice this as a subtle loss of sharpness. Thoughts still come, but they arrive slower. They take longer to assemble. They feel heavier. This is not because you're failing to concentrate. It's because concentration is no longer being reinforced. The brain is beginning to reduce top-down control, the kind that keeps thoughts linear and purposeful. Instead of pushing thoughts forward, it allows them to drift. And drift is the key word here, because drift means direction without intention. At this stage, your brain is still capable of complex activity. It just doesn't insist on coherence. That's why strange associations appear. You might think of something that happened years ago, then immediately jump to an image that makes no logical sense. Then feel an emotion without a clear cause. The brain is still firing, still communicating, but the coordination has changed. This is what it feels like when one system steps aside before the others are ready. Imagine a group conversation where the moderator quietly leaves the room. Everyone keeps talking, but no one decides who speaks next. That's what's happening inside your head. One region is no longer enforcing order, and the rest are improvising. This is also why the early stages of falling asleep can feel strangely creative. Ideas connect in unusual ways. Images blend. Insights appear that feel profound until morning. Nothing magical is happening. You are simply witnessing the brain without its usual editor. And editors, as it turns out, are among the first to go. Another change follows closely behind. Your sense of effort begins to dissolve. During the day, thinking feels like something you do. At night, it begins to feel like something that happens. You don't choose the next thought as much. You receive it. This shift is subtle, but deeply important. Because agency, the feeling that I am in control, is not a constant feature of consciousness. It is actively maintained. And maintenance costs energy. When the brain decides to conserve energy, agency is negotiable. You may notice this as a reluctance to decide anything. Questions feel annoying. Choices feel heavy. Even small decisions like which position to lie in can feel strangely difficult. It's not indecision. It's withdrawal of motivational circuitry. The brain is slowly disengaging from the world of action. And action requires a self that believes it matters. As this continues, another region begins to quiet. The one responsible for tracking relevance. During the day, your brain is constantly tagging experiences as important or unimportant, urgent or trivial, safe or threatening. At night, that tagging system becomes less precise. Things stop feeling meaningful in the same way. A worry that felt overwhelming an hour ago now feels distant. Still present, perhaps, but flatter. This is not resolution. It's de-emphasis. Your brain is saying, gently, this can wait. And when enough things can wait, the structure of your mental world begins to loosen. You may notice moments where nothing feels especially compelling. No strong urge to think. No clear desire to act. Just a soft, neutral awareness. This is not boredom. Boredom requires alertness. This is the absence of demand. The brain has stopped asking you to participate fully. It is preparing to continue without you. Importantly, this does not mean the brain is becoming inactive. In some regions, activity actually increases. Sensory processing changes. Internal signals grow louder. Background noise becomes foreground texture. You might become more aware of your breathing, the weight of your body, a faint ringing in the ears. This happens because external monitoring is being deprioritized. When attention to the outside world decreases, internal sensations fill the gap. The brain is turning inward, not intentionally, automatically. And this inward turn is what sets the stage for everything that follows. Because once attention is no longer anchored outward, it no longer needs a stable sense of time, or sequence, or narrative. Those systems belong to interaction with the world. Inside, different rules apply. This is why the night feels expansive in strange ways. Thoughts don't move in straight lines. They orbit. They echo. You may feel as though you are hovering just above yourself, still aware, but slightly detached. This detachment is not dissociation. It is decoupling. Your brain is loosening the ties between sensation, interpretation, and response. And it does this gradually, because sudden disconnection would be dangerous. So instead, the brain dims selectively, piece by piece, layer by layer, always leaving enough online to keep you safe, always removing enough to make room for rest. At this stage, you are still very much you, but you are a cuter version, a thinner version, a version that requires less structure to exist. And the most important thing to understand is this: nothing has gone wrong. The strange feelings, the drifting thoughts, the softened edges of awareness, these are signs that the process is working. The brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, which raises a deeper question. If some parts of the brain can step away while others remain active, if awareness can exist without full control, if thinking can continue without ownership, then what exactly is the minimum version of you that can still be present? And how much can be taken away before that presence finally disappears? That's what we'll begin to uncover next. The next thing to fade is not memory, not time, not even awareness. It's judgment, the quiet, constant voice that evaluates everything you experience. During the day, this system never stops working. It checks your thoughts for accuracy. It filters impulses. It corrects mistakes before they reach the surface. It's the part of you that says, "That doesn't make sense," or "That's not logical," or "I shouldn't be thinking this right now." At night, that voice grows tired before anything else. You can feel it in the way thoughts begin to slip past without resistance. A strange idea appears, and instead of questioning it, you let it pass. A contradiction shows up, and instead of fixing it, you ignore it. A worry forms, but it doesn't tighten the way it usually does. This isn't because you've become wiser or calmer. It's because the system responsible for critical control is slowly disengaging. The brain no longer sees value in precision. During the day, precision keeps you functional. At night, precision is a liability. So the brain begins to loosen its grip on logic. Not suddenly, not completely, just enough that reasoning starts to feel optional. You might notice this when you try to follow a structured thought, a plan, a calculation, a familiar mental path. You can still walk it, but you don't feel compelled to finish the journey. Halfway through, the effort feels unnecessary. The thought dissolves before reaching its conclusion. This is not forgetfulness. It's disengagement. The brain is no longer investing energy in completing mental loops, because loops exist to guide action, and action is no longer required. This is why, in these moments, you can be aware that your thinking has become illogical without caring enough to correct it. You might even recognize the absurdity of a thought and still allow it to linger. That tolerance is new. It signals that the brain's executive systems, the ones that normally supervise and constrain your inner world, are stepping back. And when supervision weakens, something interesting happens. Thoughts lose hierarchy. There is no longer a clear sense of which thought matters more than another. A memory from childhood carries the same weight as a problem from work. An imagined scene feels as relevant as a real concern. Everything floats on the same level. This flattening is deeply disorienting if you notice it, because meaning, during the day, is ranked. Some things demand attention. Others fade into the background. At night, that ranking system erodes. The brain stops asking, "Is this important?" Instead, it allows whatever arises to exist briefly and then disappear. This is why nights are full of unfinished thoughts. Not because you're distracted, but because the brain has stopped insisting on closure. Closure is a daytime requirement. Sleep does not need resolution. It needs release. And release begins with letting logic loosen its hold. As this continues, your sense of certainty begins to thin. Not certainty about facts, but certainty about yourself. You may feel moments of mild confusion that don't alarm you. You might forget what you were just thinking about, then feel no urgency to recover it. You might question whether you were awake a moment ago, then let the question fade without answering it. Normally, this would trigger concern. Concern is a function of self-monitoring. At night, self-monitoring becomes inefficient. The brain stops checking itself as frequently, and without constant checking, the sense of a stable, continuous eye begins to loosen. This is subtle, so subtle that most people never notice it. But if you stay with the experience, if you don't rush past it, you can sense the beginning of fragmentation. Not fragmentation into pieces, but fragmentation into layers. Some layers remain active, others grow quiet. You are still aware, still conscious, but you are no longer fully assembled. This is where many people describe feeling out of it. But that phrase hides something important. You are not out of consciousness. You are out of control. And control, it turns out, is not essential for awareness to exist. The brain can maintain perception without maintaining authority. Thoughts can occur without being evaluated. Sensations can arise without being interpreted. Feelings can exist without being explained. This is not chaos. It is efficiency. The brain is reducing complexity, and reduction always starts with systems that demand the most energy. Logic is expensive. Judgment is expensive. Self-correction is expensive. So they go first. What remains is a softer form of awareness. One that observes without interference. One that allows experience to pass through unfiltered. This is why, in this state, things can feel strangely neutral. Not good, not bad, just present. The emotional weight of thoughts decreases. The urgency dissolves. You might still think about something that once mattered deeply, but it no longer grips you. That grip required constant reinforcement, and the brain has stopped reinforcing it. As this process deepens, the idea of effort itself begins to feel distant. Trying to think feels unnecessary. Trying to focus feels unnatural. You are no longer doing consciousness. You are inhabiting it. And this shift prepares the ground for the next transformation. Because once logic loosens, once judgment fades, once control steps aside, the brain is free to alter something even more fundamental: the way you experience time. And when time begins to break down, the sense of continuity, the thread that ties one moment of you to the next, starts to fray. That's where we're going next. Time is not something you perceive. It is something your brain constructs. During the day, that construction is so stable, you mistake it for reality. Seconds stack cleanly. Moments follow one another. There is a clear sense of before and after. At night, that structure weakens. And when it does, time doesn't slow down or speed up. It loses shape. You can feel the first cracks in small, familiar ways. You glance at the clock. It says 11:42. You close your eyes, certain that several minutes have passed. You open them again. Or worse, you open your eyes and it's 12:10, and you have no memory of the space in between. This gap is not sleep. It's something quieter, a failure of temporal stitching. Your brain relies on a network of systems to keep time coherent. They monitor change. They track sequence. They anchor experience to a continuous internal rhythm. But these systems are tightly linked to attention. And attention, at night, is already withdrawing. As attention loosens, the brain stops updating its internal clock with the same precision. Moments no longer register cleanly. Some stretch. Some collapse. Some simply fail to register at all. This is why time before sleep feels unreliable. Not dramatic, just untrustworthy. You may feel as though you've been lying there forever, or as though the night is skipping ahead without you. Neither is true. What's happening is simpler and more unsettling. Your brain is no longer keeping careful track of succession, and without succession, continuity begins to break. Continuity is what makes you feel like the same person from one moment to the next. It's the invisible thread that says, this thought follows the last one. This moment belongs to the same me as the one before it. When that thread weakens, experience becomes less linear. You might notice thoughts no longer feel arranged in order. An image appears with no clear origin. A feeling surfaces without a cause. A memory arrives detached from its timeline. This is not randomness. It is temporal disassembly. Your brain is gradually letting go of the machinery that organizes experience into a story. Stories require time. Sleep does not. As time loses structure, something else begins to happen. The sense of duration fades. You stop being able to estimate how long you've been thinking about something. Was it seconds? Minutes? The question feels oddly irrelevant. Relevance itself depends on time. Without a stable sense of time passing, the urgency of thoughts evaporates. That's why worries soften at night. Not because they're resolved, but because resolution exists in the future. And the future is becoming less distinct. At this stage, the present moment begins to feel thicker. Not more vivid, just heavier. Moments don't flow as cleanly into one another. They linger. Sometimes they overlap. This can feel peaceful or slightly disorienting. You might sense that you are suspended inside a moment rather than moving through time. This is not meditation. This is not relaxation. This is the brain abandoning its role as a timekeeper. And when timekeeping weakens, memory struggles to function. Because memory depends on sequence. To remember something, the brain must know when it happened relative to something else. As that ability fades, memories stop anchoring properly. You might recall fragments, images, emotions, impressions, but not their place. This is why the moments before sleep are so hard to remember the next day. Not because nothing happened, but because the brain did not assign those moments a position in time. Without position, they cannot be retrieved. They dissolve. And as memories dissolve, the sense of a continuous self thins further. You are still aware, still present, but the feeling of being carried forward through time is weakening. You are no longer moving through moments. You are hovering within them. This hovering is unstable. It cannot last. The brain does not tolerate ambiguity for long, so it continues the process. If time no longer organizes experience, if logic no longer enforces order, if judgment has already stepped aside, then the next system to falter is the one that relies on all of them. Short-term memory, the fragile holding space that keeps thoughts alive just long enough for you to feel like a single, continuous I. And once that space begins to fail, the present moment no longer connects cleanly to itself. That's where we'll go next. Short-term memory is not memory in the way you usually think about it. It is not a storage place. It does not archive. It does not preserve. It holds, briefly, delicately, just long enough for the present moment to feel connected to itself. During the day, this holding happens constantly and invisibly. A thought appears. It stays long enough to be examined. It links to the next thought, then the next. This chain is what gives you the sensation of continuity, the feeling that you are one person, moving forward moment by moment. At night, that chain weakens, not because the brain is broken, not because something has gone wrong, but because holding requires effort, and effort is one of the first things the brain begins to release. You can feel this happening if you pay close attention. A thought enters your mind, not a big one, just something ordinary, a sentence you were forming, an image you were following, a concern you were replaying, and then, without warning, it slips, not erased, not interrupted, just gone. You are aware that something was there. You can sense its absence, almost like the echo of a word you can't quite hear. You might try to bring it back. You retrace your mental steps. You scan for clues, but there is nothing to grasp. The space where the thought was has already closed. This is not distraction. Distraction means something else has taken its place. Here, there is simply nothing. That nothing is important, because it marks the moment when short-term memory fails to do its job. Short-term memory depends on a structure deep in the brain that acts like a temporary bridge. It allows information to pass from perception into continuity. At night, that bridge begins to weaken, not collapse, just loosen. Information still crosses, but not reliably. Some thoughts make it through. Others fall away mid-transfer. This is why nights feel full of unfinished ideas. Not incomplete in a frustrating way. Incomplete in a gentle, drifting way. Your brain is no longer insisting that thoughts be completed. Completion is unnecessary for sleep. So the system that enforces it begins to disengage. This is also why repetition becomes common. You may find yourself thinking the same thing over and over. Not because you're stuck, but because the thought never fully consolidates. It enters awareness, hovers briefly, then dissolves before it can be stored or dismissed. With nothing to mark it as done, it returns again and again. This looping can feel hypnotic or vaguely unsettling, but it is not anxiety. It is the brain losing its ability to hold, and holding is what allows progress. Without holding, there is no forward motion, only emergence and disappearance. This is a critical shift, because the sense of self depends heavily on short-term memory. To feel like you must remember what you were just thinking. Not long ago, not years ago, just moments ago. That fragile thread is what keeps experience stitched together. As it weakens, something subtle happens. You begin to feel less anchored, not confused, not lost, just less fixed. Thoughts no longer stack neatly. They appear one at a time, without piling up. There is less mental clutter, but also less structure. This is why the moments before sleep can feel oddly spacious. Your mind feels quieter, not because there are fewer thoughts, but because fewer thoughts are being held simultaneously. The mental load decreases, and with it, the sense of being burdened by your own thinking. But this relief comes at a cost. As holding weakens, so does continuity. You may notice brief moments where you are not entirely sure how long you've been lying there. Not because you fell asleep, but because the chain connecting one moment to the next has loosened. Each moment exists, but they no longer reference one another. They float. This floating is not yet dreaming. Dreaming requires memory, a different kind, to construct narratives. Here, narrative is failing. What remains is pure immediacy. moment after moment, unlinked. This is closer to how consciousness exists in very early childhood, before memory fully stabilizes, before the self feels permanent. At night, your brain returns to this state, not to regress, but to conserve. Maintaining continuity is expensive. It requires constant neural reinforcement. When that reinforcement stops, continuity dissolves. And when continuity dissolves, the idea of a stable I begins to thin. You are still aware, but you are aware in pulses. One moment clear, the next vague, the next absent. You may not notice the absences at first, because noticing requires memory, and memory is already slipping. This is why the transition into sleep feels like falling through gaps. You don't experience the gaps themselves. You experience the moments on either side. The missing parts vanish without record. This is not a failure of awareness. It is a failure of retention. And retention is not guaranteed. As this process deepens, something else begins to change. The emotional tone of thoughts flattens. Normally, emotions help mark memories. They highlight what matters. At night, emotions soften, not disappear, but lose their sharpness. Without strong emotional tagging, thoughts are less likely to be held. They fade faster. This is why worries lose their edge at night. They are still present, but they don't stick. The brain is gently saying, this does not need to be carried forward. Carry is the right word. Short-term memory is what carries experience from one moment to the next. When carrying becomes optional, experience becomes lighter, but also more fragile. This fragility is where the feeling of almost asleep comes from. You are not crossing a threshold. You are dropping pieces, one by one, and each piece dropped makes it harder to remember what just happened. You may even forget that you were trying to sleep. The intention dissolves. Intentions require memory. Without memory, there is no plan to fulfill. This is why people often fall asleep the moment they stop trying. Trying is a form of holding, and holding is what the brain is undoing. As short-term memory continues to weaken, a strange phenomenon appears. You may become aware that you were just not aware. A flicker of realization. Was I gone for a second? That question arises too late. The gap has already closed. You cannot examine it. You cannot return to it. You only know that something was missing. This is one of the last moments where you can still notice disappearance. Soon, even that will stop. Because noticing requires continuity, and continuity is unraveling. This is the edge. Not between wakefulness and sleep, but between continuous awareness and fragmented presence. From here on, awareness will still occur, but it will no longer be reliably connected to itself. Thoughts may appear without memory of the previous thought. Sensations may arise without context. You may feel like you are dropping in and out, even though nothing dramatic is happening. This is not unconsciousness. This is unrecorded consciousness. Experience without trace. And without trace, experience does not accumulate. Without accumulation, there is no story. Without story, there is no stable self. This is why the self feels thinner now. Not gone, just less reinforced. Short-term memory was one of the last systems tying moments together. As it loosens, the mind becomes a sequence of isolated flashes, each one complete in itself, but unlinked. This state cannot last. The brain will soon shift into a different mode entirely, one that no longer depends on holding or continuity, one that allows experience to continue without requiring a you to carry it. But before that happens, something else begins to falter, something even more intimate than memory. The sense of ownership, the feeling that thoughts belong to you, that experiences are happening to someone. As memory weakens, ownership becomes harder to maintain, because ownership requires a remembered self, and the remembered self is slipping That's where we're going next. Because once thoughts no longer belong to anyone, the boundary between me and not me begins to dissolve. And when that boundary dissolves, the night takes on an entirely different quality. There is a moment brief, fragile, and rarely remembered when thoughts continue, but ownership quietly slips away. You don't notice it all at once. In fact, you almost can't notice it at all, because noticing requires a sense of mind, and that sense is beginning to loosen. During the day, every thought arrives with a label. My thought, my memory, my worry. Even when you don't consciously say it, the feeling is there. An invisible tag that ties experience to a center. At night, that tagging system weakens. Not dramatically, not completely. It simply stops insisting. You can feel this shift if you stay with the experience long enough. A thought appears, and instead of feeling like something you produced, it feels more like something that passed through. There is no effort behind it, no intention. It arrives already formed and leaves without explanation. You might still say, "I'm thinking," but the statement feels slightly inaccurate, as if the thinking is happening and you are nearby. This is unsettling only if you resist it. Most people don't. They slide past this moment without noticing, because the brain has evolved to make this transition gentle. Ownership is not removed. It is deprioritized. And once deprioritized, it fades on its own. The sense of ownership depends on several systems working together. Memory must hold the thought long enough to be claimed. Attention must highlight it as relevant. The self-model must register it as belonging to a continuous me. We've already seen what happens when memory weakens. Attention has softened. Continuity is thinning. Ownership cannot survive without those supports. So it begins to drift. This is why, in the moments before sleep, thoughts can feel oddly anonymous. You may hear a sentence in your mind, but it doesn't feel like your voice. Not someone else's either. Just a voice. You may see an image, but it doesn't feel like you imagined it. It simply appears. This is not dissociation. Dissociation involves distance and discomfort. This is closeness without possession. Experience is still intimate, still immediate. It's just no longer centered. And when experience loses its center, something subtle changes. The boundary between inner and outer softens. Sounds from the room blend with inner imagery. Sensations from the body merge with thought. You may hear a distant noise and not immediately classify it as external. You may feel your breath and not clearly separate it from awareness. These distinctions are maintained actively during the day. At night, the brain stops enforcing them, because enforcing boundaries costs energy, and boundaries are not required for rest. This is where many people describe feeling floaty. But floating suggests upward movement. What's actually happening is unanchoring. The anchor that tied experience to a point labeled me is loosening, not removed, just slackened. You can sense this slack in the way emotions behave. Earlier, we noticed that emotions flatten. Now, they become impersonal. A feeling arises, warmth, heaviness, faint sadness, but it doesn't demand interpretation. You don't ask, "Why do I feel this way?" The question feels unnecessary, because the feeling is no longer framed as happening to you. It is simply present. This is an important transition. During the day, emotions are signals. They point outward. They demand action. They tell you something needs to be addressed. At night, emotions lose their directive quality. They become textures, background sensations. Without ownership, there is no one to instruct. So the feeling exists without purpose. This is why the night can feel emotionally quiet, even when feelings are still present. They are no longer knocking. They are resting. As ownership continues to weaken, language begins to change. Earlier, we noticed that sentences trail off. Now, pronouns start to lose relevance. The word I feels less useful. You may still think it, but it doesn't carry the same weight. Thoughts no longer revolve around a central narrator. They form without introduction. They dissolve without farewell. This can feel peaceful or strange, or both, because the sense of self you've lived inside your entire life is not disappearing. It is becoming optional. And optional things don't announce their absence. They simply stop showing up. This is why the moment is so hard to remember later. Ownership is what records experience as mine. Without it, there is nothing to retrieve. The experience happened, but it did not belong to anyone, so it leaves no trace. You might later say, "I fell asleep." But that's a reconstruction. What actually happened is that you stopped being necessary. The brain did not shut you off. It simply stopped consulting you. This raises an uncomfortable realization. The sense of self you protect so carefully during the day, the one you assume is essential for awareness to exist, is not required for experience to continue. Experience does not depend on ownership. It depends on processing. And processing continues long after ownership fades. This is why, later in the night, dreams will unfold without a stable you. Scenes will appear. Events will happen. Emotions will rise and fall, all without a consistent narrator. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're in the delicate space where ownership is thinning, but awareness remains. A place where experience is still conscious, but no longer personal. You may notice moments where you are not entirely sure who is experiencing what. The question, "Who am I right now?" may briefly arise, and then dissolve before it can be answered. Because answers require a center, and the center is softening. This softening allows something else to emerge, a sense of openness. Without a strong self-boundary, awareness spreads, not outward, but evenly. There is no focal point demanding attention. Everything has equal weight. A sound, a sensation, a flicker of thought. All coexist without hierarchy. This is why nights feel different from days. Not darker, just flatter, more even. The peaks and valleys of experience smooth out. And in that smoothing, effort becomes unnecessary. You are no longer trying to think. Thinking is happening. You are no longer trying to feel. Feeling is present. You are no longer trying to be. Being is unfolding on its own. This is a profound reduction. And reduction is the brain's strategy for crossing the next threshold. Because the next thing to change requires ownership to already be weak. Time is already unstable. Memory is already fragile. Logic has stepped aside. Now ownership is thinning. What remains is awareness without a reference point. And awareness without a reference point behaves very differently. It begins to lose its sense of position. You may feel as though you are not quite located behind your eyes anymore, not floating above, not sinking below, just unplaced. Location is another construct the brain maintains actively. It requires body maps, spatial processing, and a stable sense of perspective. We've already seen those systems blur. As they continue to quiet, awareness becomes less localized. There is no clear here, and without here, the distinction between inside and outside fades further. This is not mystical, it is mechanical. The brain is stripping away layers that are unnecessary for unconscious processing, and each layer removed brings you closer to a state where experience no longer needs a self to host it. This is the edge of something important. Because once awareness is no longer owned, once it is no longer located, once it no longer tracks time reliably, then the idea of a boundary between me and not me begins to dissolve. Not dramatically, quietly. And when that boundary dissolves, something remarkable happens. Experience continues, but there's no longer a clear distinction between observer and observed. That is the moment when the brain stops constructing a self altogether, and that is where we go next. Before awareness disappears, before sleep fully claims you, The brain lets go of something far more intimate than thoughts. It lets go of your body. Not the body itself, not movement, not breathing, not the quiet machinery that keeps you alive. Those systems remain precise and guarded. What fades is the felt outline of the body, the sense that you are located inside a physical form. During the day, this sense is constant. You don't notice it because it never leaves. You know where your hands are without looking. You feel the boundary of your skin without touching it. You exist inside a clearly defined shape. This is not passive. Your brain is actively maintaining a detailed map of your body at all times. Every joint, every limb, every edge. This map is updated continuously through sensation, movement, pressure, balance. It tells you where you are. At night, the brain stops updating that map with the same urgency. Not because it forgets the body, but because the body no longer needs to act. And when action is no longer required, precision becomes unnecessary. You can feel this transition begin subtly. Your hands feel heavier, not in weight, but in presence. They seem farther away, as if they belong to a larger mass you're no longer tracking carefully. Your legs lose definition. You know they are there, but you could not describe exactly where they begin or end. Your shoulders soften into the surface beneath you. The boundary between your back and the bed becomes ambiguous. Are you resting on it or emerging with it? This is not imagination. This is sensory deprioritization. The brain is reducing the resolution of bodily awareness. High-resolution mapping is expensive. It requires constant feedback and correction. At night, the brain chooses efficiency. So it turns the map down. Not off, just dimmer. And when the map dims, something curious happens. The body feels less like an object you occupy and more like a sensation you are vaguely aware of. You may notice that you stop checking your posture. Earlier, you adjusted, shifted, found the right position. Now, you stop caring. Comfort becomes less specific. There is no longer a perfect alignment to achieve. This is because alignment matters only when the brain expects movement. When movement is unlikely, the need for precision fades. The brain quietly assumes stillness. As this assumption settles in, the sense of effort leaves the body. Muscles relax, not because you tell them to, but because the command structures that maintain tone are stepping back. You are not relaxing. You are being released. This release often comes with a peculiar sensation, a feeling of sinking. Not falling, sinking, as if gravity has increased slightly, but gravity has not changed. Your perception of resistance has. During the day, the brain actively counteracts the sensation of weight. It keeps you upright, alert, ready. At night, that counteraction fades, so weight becomes noticeable. The body feels denser, heavier, not unpleasant, just present in a different way. At the same time, another sensation may appear, a spreading warmth, not heat, warmth, diffuse and directionless. This is the nervous system shifting into a mode that favors internal regulation over external interaction. Blood flow redistributes. Muscle tone decreases. The body prepares to stay still for a long time. As this continues, something important begins to change. The sense of where you are located inside your body becomes unstable. Normally, awareness feels centered behind the eyes, somewhere in the head. At night, that center softens. You may feel awareness drift downward, or expand outward, or lose a clear location altogether. This is not movement. It is decentering. The brain stops anchoring awareness to a specific point, because point of view is only necessary when interacting with the world. In stillness, perspective is optional. This is where some people feel as though they are spreading out, not floating above, not sinking below, just expanding. Awareness no longer feels confined to a skull. It feels distributed. This can be calming, or strange, or both. Because the idea that you are located somewhere specific is deeply ingrained. It feels fundamental, but it is not. It is constructed, and that construction requires effort. At night, effort is reduced, so the sense of location becomes less precise. You may notice moments where you are unsure whether your eyes are open or closed. The difference feels less significant. Visual input is minimal either way. The brain stops prioritizing the distinction. This is another sign that external monitoring has been deprioritized. Inside becomes more important than outside, but even inside is starting to blur. As bodily boundaries soften, the line between sensation and awareness thins. You may feel your breath not as movement, but as rhythm. The rise and fall of the chest becomes abstract, less mechanical, more like a wave. This is because the brain has shifted from controlling breathing to observing it. Control requires engagement. Observation does not. Soon, even observation will become optional. But for now, you are still aware enough to notice the change. This is a delicate stage, one where awareness remains, but its anchors are loosening. Body boundaries, spatial location, effort, all thinning. You might notice a faint tingling in your limbs, or a sense of vibration. These sensations are not signals. They are artifacts of the nervous system changing state. As sensory input decreases, background neural noise becomes more noticeable. The brain is quieter, so you hear the hum. This hum is not meaningful. It does not need interpretation. It is simply what remains when sharper signals fade. This is why the body can feel simultaneously heavy and insubstantial. Heavy, because muscle tone has dropped. Insubstantial, because the brain is no longer defining edges clearly. This contradiction is unsettling only if you try to resolve it. Resolution requires logic. Logic has already stepped aside. So the contradiction remains, and then dissolves. As bodily awareness continues to blur, something subtle but profound happens. The distinction between having a body and being awareness begins to loosen. Earlier in the night, thoughts detached from ownership. Now, sensations do the same. A sensation appears pressure, warmth, movement. But it doesn't feel like something happening to you. It simply exists, without commentary, without interpretation. This is why pain is rare at this stage. Pain requires attention and evaluation. Without evaluation, sensation does not become suffering. It becomes neutral. This neutrality is protective. The brain does not want to be startled awake by minor sensations, so it strips them of urgency. This is the beginning of sensory quiet. Not silence, but irrelevance. As irrelevance spreads, the body fades into the background. You are still breathing, still alive, still safe. But the body no longer demands awareness. It becomes something the brain trusts enough to ignore. This trust is essential. Sleep cannot occur if the brain feels the need to monitor the body closely. So once trust is established, monitoring decreases. And when monitoring decreases, awareness loses another anchor. Earlier, memory was one anchor, then time, then ownership, now the body. Each anchor removed makes awareness lighter, less bound, less defined. This is not loss. It is simplification. The brain is removing what is unnecessary. What remains is bare awareness. And bare awareness behaves differently. Without a body map to orient it, without memory to link it, without ownership to claim it, awareness begins to feel vast, not infinite, just uncontained. This is where some people feel a sense of openness that is hard to describe. A quiet spaciousness, not inside the body, not outside it, just present. This state is unstable. It cannot persist for long, because awareness without anchors cannot sustain itself indefinitely. The brain will soon transition into a mode where awareness is no longer continuous. But before that happens, there is one more shift. one that depends on everything that has already faded, the sense of space itself. Because once the body loses its outline, once awareness loses its location, once inside and outside blur, the brain's internal sense of space begins to stretch. Not physical space, mental space, the space where experience happens. And when that space changes, the boundary between self and world dissolves even further. That is the next stage. And once it begins, the idea of being someone in a body becomes increasingly optional. That's where we're going next. When the body fades, space takes its place. Not physical space, not the room around you, not the distance between walls. This is a quieter kind of space. The space inside experience itself. During the day, this space is narrow and directed. Attention points outward. Thoughts move forward. Awareness has a clear center and a clear edge. At night, that structure loosens. And once the body no longer defines the boundaries, the mind begins to feel larger. Not expanded in a dramatic way, not infinite, just less contained. You may notice this as a subtle widening. Thoughts don't feel close to your face anymore. Sensations don't feel pinned to a specific location. Awareness no longer feels like it's coming from a single point. Instead, it feels distributed, as if experience is happening everywhere at once, but nowhere in particular. This is not imagination. This is what awareness feels like when the brain stops anchoring it to coordinates. Normally, the brain uses the body as a reference frame. Left and right, up and down, near and far. Those references are maintained by constant sensory input. But earlier, we saw that sensory precision has been reduced. The body map has blurred. The sense of location has softened. Without a reliable reference frame, space becomes flexible, not distorted, undefined. This is why, in these moments, it can feel as though the room has disappeared. Not gone, just irrelevant. You know the room exists, but it no longer feels present. The walls don't matter. The ceiling doesn't matter. Distance loses meaning. This is not because the brain is hallucinating. It's because the brain is no longer constructing a detailed spatial model of the outside world. Why would it? You are not moving. You are not interacting. You are not navigating. Spatial precision serves no purpose here. So the brain reallocates resources. It turns attention inward. But inward, there is no fixed geometry. Thoughts do not occupy space the way objects do. Sensations do not have coordinates. So when awareness turns inward without anchors, space becomes abstract. You may feel as though awareness is spreading, but spreading implies direction. What's actually happening is that awareness is no longer being compressed. During the day, awareness is tightly focused to allow efficient action. At night, that compression relaxes. And when compression relaxes, experience feels spacious. This spaciousness can feel peaceful or slightly unsettling because it removes a familiar constraint. You are used to being located somewhere. You are used to having a point of view. Now, the point of view is dissolving. You may notice moments where you are unsure where you are relative to your thoughts. Are the thoughts happening in front of you? Behind you? Around you? The question makes less sense the longer you sit with it, because spatial metaphors no longer apply. This is a sign that the brain's spatial processing systems are stepping back, not off, just quiet. As they quiet, awareness becomes less directional. You are no longer looking at experience. You are simply in it. This is why the mind can feel still even when thoughts are present. Stillness does not mean absence of activity. It means absence of movement toward or away from anything. Earlier, thoughts drifted because logic had loosened. Now, they drift because space itself no longer guides them. There is no mental place for them to go. They appear, hover, and dissolve, not moving forward, not moving backward, just appearing. This can feel timeless. but it is not the same as time stopping. It is time becoming irrelevant. Earlier, time lost structure. Now, it loses importance. When experience no longer unfolds in a spatial narrative, time has nothing to organize. Moments no longer lead to one another. They simply exist. This is why the present moment can feel thick here, not heavy, full, as if awareness is saturated, not with content, but with presence. You may feel as though you are surrounded by awareness rather than containing it. This reversal is subtle, but it marks a critical transition. Earlier in the night, awareness belonged to you. Then ownership loosened. Now, awareness feels like the environment itself. You are not having awareness. You are within it. This is not a philosophical claim. It is a perceptual shift, one that occurs when the brain stops modeling the self as separate from experience. Normally, the brain maintains a distinction between observer and observed. This distinction allows you to act on the world, but action is no longer required. So the distinction softens, and when it softens, awareness stops feeling personal. It becomes ambient. This is why some people describe this stage as empty, even though there is clearly something happening. The emptiness is not lack. It is lack of separation. There is no foreground and background, no center and periphery. Everything has equal weight. This equality can feel deeply calming. Nothing demands your attention. Nothing pulls you. Nothing needs to be resolved. You are no longer managing experience. Experience is managing itself. This is a profound shift, and it depends entirely on what has already happened. If memory were still strong, you would label this state. If time were still structured, you would wonder how long it would last. If ownership were still intact, you would ask what it means. But those systems are quiet, so the state simply exists. Without commentary, without interpretation. This is why it is so hard to describe later. Language requires distinctions. Here, distinctions are fading. Even the idea of inside versus outside becomes unstable. Earlier, the boundary between body and bed blurred. Now, the boundary between inner experience and outer sensation blurs as well. A distant sound may appear in awareness without being identified as external. A bodily sensation may arise without being clearly felt as internal. The brain is no longer categorizing inputs by source. It no longer asks, "Where did this come from?" Source attribution is useful when responding to the environment. At night, response is unnecessary. So categorization stops. And without categorization, experience becomes unified, not merged, undifferentiated. This is often the point where people feel they are almost asleep. But that phrase hides what is actually happening. You are not approaching unconsciousness. You are approaching non-local awareness. Awareness that is not centered anywhere. Awareness that does not belong to a self. Awareness that does not track time. This awareness is unstable. It cannot maintain itself indefinitely, because the brain is not designed to hold this state. It is a transition, a corridor, and the corridor does not have walls. This is why the feeling can be hard to tolerate if you resist it. Resistance requires a sense of self, and the self is already thinning. If you try to reassert control here, to think deliberately, to focus sharply, to come back, you will feel effort spike. And effort feels jarring in this state, like noise in a quiet room. The brain will respond by either reactivating wakefulness or dropping you deeper into sleep. This is the fork. But if you do nothing, if you allow the spaciousness to remain, the brain continues its descent, and something curious begins to happen. Within this vast, undirected space, certain patterns begin to appear. Not thoughts, not images. Patterns, subtle movements of attention, waves of sensation, faint shifts in tone. These are not dreams. They are pre-dream activity. The brain is beginning to generate internal content without reference to the external world. Earlier, internal sensations grew louder as external monitoring faded. Now, internal generation takes over. The brain is no longer responding. It is producing. This production does not require a self. It does not require ownership. It does not require memory. It only requires a substrate, a space in which to occur. And that space has now opened. This is the purpose of everything that has come before. Logic stepped aside to reduce control. Time unraveled to remove sequence. Memory weakened to release continuity. Ownership faded to remove the center. The body blurred to dissolve boundaries. Space expanded to make room. All of this was preparation. Because the next phase does not tolerate structure. It requires openness. And openness is what you now inhabit. But this openness will not remain empty for long. The brain does not like vacuum. In the absence of external input and internal constraints, it begins to fill the space. Not with coherent stories yet. Not with dreams. With fragments. Images without context. Sensations without source. Emotions without object. These fragments will soon organize themselves. But before they do, there is one more threshold, one that determines whether awareness will remain continuous or begin to flicker, because the next system to change will affect awareness itself, not ownership, not content, continuity, the smoothness with which awareness persists from one moment to the next. And once continuity breaks, the idea of staying aware no longer applies. That is the next ascent. And once it begins, there is no longer a stable place to stand. There is a point where awareness does not end. It fractures, not into pieces you can observe, not into gaps you can trace, but into moments that no longer connect. Up to now, awareness has remained continuous, thin, unanchored, diffuse, but still flowing. One moment leads gently into the next. That flow is about to break. And when it does, nothing dramatic happens. No darkness, no falling sensation, no clear disappearance, just a subtle failure of continuity. The brain does not turn awareness off. It stops maintaining it. During the day, continuity is actively enforced. The brain ensures that one moment of experience links to the next. That awareness feels uninterrupted, that there is always a now that follows the previous now. This maintenance requires energy. It depends on memory, attention, and temporal tracking, all working together. We've already seen those systems weaken. Now the brain lets go of the final reinforcement. You can feel the first sign of this release as a strange uncertainty, a moment where you are not entirely sure whether you were just aware a second ago. Not confusion, not panic, just ambiguity. You may suddenly notice yourself being aware again, without a clear sense of having been aware continuously, as if awareness restarted. But without a reboot, this is not waking up. It is flickering. Awareness is no longer guaranteed to persist moment to moment. It appears and disappears and appears again. But the disappearances leave no memory, because memory requires continuity. So you only experience the returns. This is why this stage is almost impossible to describe afterward. You never experience the absence directly. You only experience the moments where awareness resumes. And by the time it does, the gap has already erased itself. This creates a peculiar illusion. It feels as though you have been aware the whole time, even when you have not. The brain fills in the blanks. Continuity is assumed, but assumption is not experience. This is the beginning of unrecorded consciousness, moments of awareness that occur without being linked, stored, or claimed. They happen, but they do not accumulate. Without accumulation, there is no narrative. Without narrative, there is no self observing a flow of experience. There is only isolated presence, one pulse at a time. You might notice this as brief flashes of awareness. A sensation appears, then nothing. A vague image forms, then gone. A feeling flickers, then silence. Each fragment is complete in itself, but they do not connect. This is not dreaming. Dreams require continuity to unfold scenes and stories. Here, continuity is absent, so nothing develops. Everything appears fully formed and vanishes before it can change. This is the last stage where awareness still exists without structure, and it is unstable. The brain does not linger here, because awareness without continuity serves no function. It cannot guide behavior. It cannot learn. It cannot remember. So the brain moves on. But before it does, there is a brief and strange sensation that some people recall. A feeling of reset. Not a loss of consciousness, but a loss of reference. You may sense that awareness has no past, only a present. No, just before. This can feel eerily clean, as if the mind has been wiped. Not emptied, but simplified. Nothing weighs on awareness, because nothing precedes it. This is what awareness feels like, without history, without memory, without ownership, without time. It is light, but also unsustainable, because the brain is not designed to keep awareness active in this form. The mechanisms that support awareness are now running on minimal input. They flicker, and with each flicker, the probability of reactivation decreases. Eventually, the gaps grow longer, not experienced as longer, because experience does not register absence, but functionally longer, until awareness no longer reappears at all. This is not a collapse. It is a fading of probability. The chance that awareness will arise in the next moment drops towards zero, and when it does, there is no one left to notice. But we are not quite there yet. There is one more transition before full unconsciousness, because even as continuity fails, the brain is already preparing something else, a different mode of experience, one that does not rely on continuous awareness, one that does not require a stable self, one that will soon take over completely. The brain is beginning to generate internal activity in a new way. Earlier, we saw fragments appear without context. Now, those fragments begin to relate, not logically, not sequentially, associatively. Images begin to cluster, sensations begin to link, emotions begin to color experience again, but without a narrator, without a timeline, without a stable point of view. This is the threshold between fragmented awareness and dreaming. But dreams do not begin fully formed. They assemble, slowly, and the assembly begins here. In the absence of continuity, the brain switches strategies. Instead of maintaining awareness, it begins to generate patterns. Instead of holding experience, it begins to simulate it. This simulation does not require you. It does not ask for permission. It does not check whether awareness is present. It simply runs. At first, it is disorganized. Images flicker without meaning. Emotions arise without objects. Scenes form and dissolve before they can stabilize. This is hypnagogia, the pre-dream state. But we won't name it, because naming implies structure, and structure is not yet stable. At this point, awareness may still flicker back in. You might catch a glimpse of an image, a face, a movement, a sudden emotion, and then nothing. These glimpses are not remembered. They are not owned. They are not placed in time. They are simply events that occur. And as the brain continues, these events begin to connect, not through logic, but through emotional tone. Images that share a feeling begin to group. Sensations that resonate with one another begin to merge. The brain is finding coherence without consciousness. This is the remarkable part. The brain does not need awareness to create experience. It only needs patterns. Once patterns stabilize, awareness becomes unnecessary. the simulation will continue without observation. And when it does, awareness will no longer flicker back, because the systems that support awareness have fully disengaged. But before that final disengagement, there is one last sensation some people describe: a sense of letting go, not of the body, not of thoughts, but of the need to be present at all. This is not surrender. It is irrelevance. The brain no longer requires awareness to proceed. So awareness stops being recruited. And when it stops being recruited, it does not disappear violently. It simply does not return. The final flicker fades. And from the inside, there is no experience of that moment. No last thought. No final awareness. Because the concept of final requires continuity, and continuity is already gone. What follows is not darkness. Darkness is something you perceive. What follows is absence of perception, but absence is not experienced. It is simply what remains when experience no longer occurs. Yet the brain is far from inactive. In fact, it is about to become very busy, because now that awareness has stepped aside, now that the self has dissolved, now that continuity has ended, the brain is free to construct entire worlds, worlds that feel vivid, emotional, real, worlds that will soon contain a new you, a dream self. But that self will not remember this descent. It will not know where it came from. It will arrive fully formed, inside a story, inside a moment, inside a scene. And it will feel complete, because the brain does not need a past to generate a present. That comes next, because once awareness ends, something else takes its place. And when it does, the question is no longer what is disappearing, but what is about to begin. The sense of I does not vanish. It loosens, quietly, without resistance, without an alarm. Up to this point, many things have already stepped aside. Logic no longer insists. Time no longer organizes. Memory no longer holds. Ownership no longer claims. Space no longer contains. Continuity no longer flows. And still, something remains. A faint center. Not a clear self. Not a story. But a subtle feeling that this is happening here. That feeling is about to change. Because the brain is now disengaging from the last system that keeps experience centered around a me. During the day, your brain runs a background process that never fully stops. It is active even when you are doing nothing. Especially when you are doing nothing. It stitches together memory, emotion, body sensation, and imagination into a single reference point. Not consciously, automatically. This process is what makes experience feel personal. It answers questions you never ask out loud. Is this about me? Does this belong to my past? Does this matter to my future? Where do I fit in this moment? You are rarely aware of this process because it does not speak in words. It speaks in coherence. As long as it is running, experience feels centered, unified, owned. At night, this system becomes inefficient, not broken, just unnecessary. Because centering experience around a self is only useful when interaction is expected. You are no longer interacting. So the brain begins to withdraw from self-referencing. You can feel this withdrawal as a strange neutrality. Earlier, emotions became textures. Thoughts became anonymous. Awareness became ambient. Now, even relevance fades. A thought may appear, but it does not feel connected to your life. An image may arise, but it does not feel tied to your history. A sensation may pass, but it does not feel like it requires your response. This is not detachment. Detachment implies distance. This is decentering. Experience is no longer organized around a personal axis. There is no strong aboutness. Things are happening, but they are not happening to someone. This is subtle, so subtle that the mind often misses it. But if you stay with the experience, you may notice a brief moment of uncertainty, not confusion. A question that almost forms, then dissolves. Who is this happening to? The question does not get answered, not because it is difficult, but because the system that would normally generate an answer is already quiet. This is where the boundary between me and not me begins to soften. Earlier, that boundary blurred at the level of ownership. Now, it blurs at the level of identity. You no longer feel like a central character moving through experience. Experience no longer feels like a narrative unfolding around you. It feels like a field. Events occur within it. Sensations arise within it. Images pass through it. But there is no protagonist. This is not emptiness. It is fullness without focus. During the day, the self acts like a gravitational center. Everything bends toward it. Thoughts reference it. Emotions orbit it. Memories reinforce it. At night, that gravity weakens. And when gravity weakens, things stop orbiting. They drift. You may notice that even the idea of being someone feels distant. Not alarming, just irrelevant. You are not trying to define yourself. You are not trying to locate yourself. Those questions feel oddly heavy, as if they belong to another state. This is because identity requires memory, continuity, and relevance. All three are now fragile. Without them, identity cannot hold. It does not collapse. It dissolves. And dissolution does not feel like loss. It feels like lightness, because holding an identity requires constant maintenance. The brain does that work all day long. At night, it rests. As this resting deepens, something curious happens. You stop anticipating the next moment. During the day, awareness is always leaning forward, waiting, expecting, projecting. Even when you are still, there is a sense of what comes next. At night, that anticipation fades. There is no forward lean, no readiness, no subtle tension. Awareness stops reaching. It settles. And when awareness settles, it no longer needs a self to orient it. Orientation is about direction. Without direction, a center is unnecessary. This is why the sense of self feels optional now. Not gone, just not required. You might notice that if you try to think about yourself, your name, your life, your plans, the effort feels strange. Those concepts feel distant, flat, as if they belong to a different mode of being. They do not integrate easily into the current state. This is not repression. It is incompatibility. The brain is no longer operating in a mode that supports autobiographical reference, so autobiography fades. And without autobiography, the self loses substance. You are still aware, but awareness no longer says, "I am aware." It simply is. This is the last stage where awareness still feels vaguely personal. The next shift will remove even that subtle personalization, because once the self-referencing system disengages fully, awareness will no longer feel like yours at all. It will feel like a process running, not owned, not centered, not located, just occurring. This is where many people describe a sense of nothingness, but that word is misleading. Nothingness suggests absence. What is happening here is presence without identity, experience without a subject. This is difficult to tolerate if you try to interpret it. Interpretation requires a self, but if you let the state be, it passes smoothly, because the brain does not intend to keep you here. This is another corridor, and the corridor is narrowing. As the self model continues to fade, the brain prepares for a different kind of organization. Earlier, we saw fragments begin to cluster emotionally. Now, those clusters begin to form structures. Not stories yet, patterns, loose associations. The brain is shifting from self-centered awareness to simulation. Simulation does not require identity. It requires coherence. And coherence is easier to achieve once the self has stepped aside. This is why dreams rarely include a stable sense of identity at first. The dream self appears later, after the simulation stabilizes. Right now, the brain is still dismantling the waking self. And one final piece remains: the need to monitor experience at all. Up to now, awareness has still been checking itself occasionally, flickering, returning, noticing. That monitoring is about to stop, because monitoring requires a watcher, and the watcher has already thinned. When monitoring ceases, awareness will no longer return in flashes. It will give way entirely to internally generated experience, not unconsciousness. Replacement. But before that replacement takes over, there is one more fragile moment. A moment where experience continues, but there is no longer any sense of being here to experience it. No observer, no subject, no center, just activity. This is the edge where the waking mind finally releases its claim. And once that claim is released, the brain is free to do what it does next: construct worlds. That transition is next. And once it begins, there is no longer a you waiting on the other side. Even after logic has loosened, after time has unraveled, after memory has thinned, after ownership has faded, after identity has softened, something still lingers. Emotion. Not the sharp, narrative-driven emotions of the day. Not fear with a cause. Not joy with a reason. What remains is quieter, deeper, less specific. Emotion without an object. During the day, emotions are directional. They point toward a person, toward a memory, toward a future moment that hasn't happened yet. They demand interpretation. They insist on action. At night, that insistence dissolves. Emotion is no longer a signal. It becomes a tone. You may notice this as a faint heaviness, or a soft warmth, or a vague melancholy without sadness, or a calm that doesn't feel earned. There is no story attached. And because there is no story, the emotion does not escalate. It simply exists. This is because the brain's emotional systems are among the last to disengage. Not because they are stubborn, but because they are fundamental. Emotion evolved long before logic, long before language, long before the idea of a self. It is older than identity, so it fades later. Earlier, we saw thoughts become anonymous. Now, feelings do the same. A feeling arises, but it does not feel like your feeling. There is no urge to ask why it's there. No pressure to resolve it. It does not feel like a problem. It feels like weather, passing through awareness. This is why people often describe the moments before sleep as emotionally neutral, even though emotions are still present. Neutral does not mean empty. It means unclaimed. Without ownership, emotion loses urgency. Without urgency, it loses power. This is protective. The brain does not want emotional spikes to interrupt the descent into sleep, so it removes their hooks. It allows emotion to exist, but not to grab. You may feel a trace of sadness, but it doesn't pull you into memory. You may feel a trace of comfort, but it doesn't demand explanation. You may feel a faint sense of unease, but it does not escalate into fear. Fear requires prediction. Prediction requires time. Time is already unstable, so fear dissolves into sensation. As this continues, emotional contrast decreases. High and low flatten. Everything settles into a narrow band of tone. This is not numbness. Numbness is absence. This is compression. The emotional range narrows to conserve energy, because strong emotions require strong reinforcement, and reinforcement is no longer available. This narrowing is often experienced as calm, but it is not the calm of safety. It is the calm of irrelevance. Nothing feels important enough to react to. This is another sign that the brain has stopped expecting engagement. Earlier, identity became optional. Now, emotional investment does too. You may notice that even emotionally charged memories feel distant. They may surface briefly, but they lack intensity. They feel faded, not suppressed, just underpowered. This is because emotional memory depends on arousal, and arousal is decreasing. The nervous system is shifting toward parasympathetic dominance, the mode associated with rest and repair, but we don't need to name it. You can feel it. Breathing is slow. Heart rhythm is steady. Muscle tone is low. Emotion follows the body. As the body settles, emotion settles with it. And as emotion settles, the mind becomes less reactive. This is why the night can feel strangely forgiving. Thoughts that would normally sting do not hurt as much. Worries lose their sharp edges. Regrets feel softer. It's not because they've been resolved. It's because the system that gives them force has powered down. Emotion without force is just sensation, and sensation without ownership is just texture. As emotional force fades, another subtle change occurs. The boundary between emotion and awareness blurs. Earlier, emotions felt like something you felt. Now, they feel like part of the background. They do not stand out. They color awareness rather than interrupt it. This is why the mind begins to feel uniformly toned. Not happy, not sad, just even. This evenness allows the brain to proceed, because sharp emotional shifts would destabilize the next stage. The brain is preparing to construct internally generated experience. And to do that, it needs emotional material, but not emotional turbulence. So it quiets the peaks. It keeps the undertone. That undertone will soon shape dreams, but not yet. Right now, emotion is dissolving into atmosphere. You may notice that awareness feels softer, less alert, less watchful. Earlier, awareness flickered. Now, even the flickers feel less frequent. This is because emotion plays a role in sustaining awareness. Emotion highlights experience. It says, "This matters." As emotion flattens, awareness has less reason to return. The probability of flicker decreases, not because awareness is being suppressed, but because nothing is calling it back. This is why, at this stage, awareness can feel like it's gently sinking, not falling, not dropping, just receding. You are not being pulled away from experience. Experience is becoming less compelling, and without compulsion, awareness does not persist. This is the beginning of disengagement, not forced. Natural. The brain is no longer recruiting awareness as a resource. It doesn't need it. Internal processes are already running smoothly without it. Earlier, we saw patterns begin to form in the expanded mental space. Now, emotion quietly organizes those patterns. Not consciously, not deliberately. Emotion provides a background tone that allows fragments to associate. Images with similar emotional coloring begin to cluster. Sensations with similar textures begin to merge. This is how dreams assemble, not from logic, from resonance. But before dreams stabilize, there is a final quieting. Emotion itself becomes faint, not gone, just distant. You may notice a sense of emotional neutrality that feels deeper than calm, a kind of emotional stillness. Not because nothing is felt, but because nothing stands out. This stillness is important because it removes the last reason for awareness to remain active. Awareness responds to change, to contrast, to novelty. Here, everything is even. There is nothing to track, nothing to monitor, nothing to witness. So awareness fades without resistance. And when it fades, it does not collapse. It simply stops being reactivated. The brain transitions fully into internally generated activity. Emotion remains, but now it belongs to the simulation, not to awareness. It will color dreams. It will shape scenes, but there will be no one there to question it, no one to ask why, no one to feel that it belongs to them. This is where the waking mind finally steps aside. not because it is forced, but because it is no longer useful. What comes next is not unconsciousness. It is replacement, a different mode of experience, one that feels vivid, immersive, and real, even though the self that enters it will not remember this descent. That transition is already beginning, and once it completes, there will be no trace of this quiet, emotional fading. No memory, no marker, just a seamless jump into another world. That is the nature of sleep, not a shutdown, a handoff. And the handoff is almost complete. Language is one of the last things you notice fading, not because it disappears suddenly, but because it dissolves so quietly that the mind rarely marks the moment. During the day, language runs constantly in the background. It labels, it narrates, it organizes experience into something you can recognize and explain. You don't hear it as sound. You experience it as structure. Thoughts arrive already shaped into sentences. Feelings are wrapped in words before you even notice them. Perception is filtered through names. This is what allows the world to feel stable. At night, that structure becomes unnecessary. Earlier, logic loosened. Time unraveled. Memory thinned. Ownership softened. The body faded. Space expanded. Emotion flattened. Now, language begins to lose its grip. You can feel the first sign when sentences stop finishing themselves. A phrase begins and then trails off. Not interrupted, not replaced, just incomplete. There is no urge to complete it. Completion is a linguistic habit, and habits require reinforcement. The brain has stopped reinforcing this one. Words still appear, but they feel lighter, less solid, as if they are made of mist rather than meaning. You may notice that inner speech slows, not because you are tired, but because speaking internally feels unnecessary. There is no one to speak to. Earlier, ownership faded. Now, address fades. Language evolved for communication, first with others, then with ourselves. When there is no longer a clear self to address, language loses purpose. You might notice that thoughts become shorter, single words, fragments, sometimes just impressions. An image, a sensation, a vague sense of something without a name. This is not confusion. It is pre-linguistic awareness. The brain existed long before language, and at night, it returns to that older mode. This is why it can feel difficult to think in the usual way. Thinking, during the day, is largely linguistic. At night, thinking becomes imagistic and sensory. Earlier, images began to appear without context. Now, language no longer arrives to explain them. You may see a flash of color, a shape, a movement. There is no voice saying what it is. And strangely, you do not need one. Meaning is no longer constructed verbally. It is felt directly. This is a profound shift, because language does more than describe experience. It stabilizes it. It freezes it into categories. Without language, experience becomes fluid. It cannot be pinned down. You may notice that even the idea of asking questions feels distant. Questions require words. They require structure. They require a subject who wants answers. Earlier, identity softened. Now, curiosity does too. Not because the mind is dull, but because nothing needs to be known. Knowing is a daytime activity. At night, the brain prioritizes processing, not explanation. This is why the moment before sleep feels ineffable. You cannot quite put it into words, not because it is mystical, but because the machinery that produces words is stepping back. Language centers are energy hungry. They coordinate meaning, syntax, memory, and attention. At night, their activity becomes optional, so the brain turns them down, not off, just quiet. You may still hear a word here and there, but it feels hollow, detached from urgency. as if it doesn't quite belong. Pronouns feel especially weak. The word I feels unnecessary. It does not anchor anything. Earlier, identity became optional. Now, the word that names identity follows. Without a stable self, pronouns lose function. You don't need I to experience sensation. You don't need me to notice warmth or movement or color. Those things occur without grammar. As grammar loosens, inner speech loses coherence. Not in a chaotic way. In a simplifying way. Sentences break into phrases. Phrases break into tones. Tones break in to feeling. Eventually, even that breaks. And what remains is pure, unlabeled experience. This is where many people describe wordlessness. But that suggests something is missing. Nothing is missing. Something has been removed. Language is a layer, a powerful one, but not essential for awareness. Earlier, awareness became ambient. Now, it becomes nonverbal. This is the state where awareness feels closest to sensation itself. No commentary, no narration, no explanation, just presence. You may notice that if you try to name what you are feeling, the attempt feels heavy, effortful, like dragging something dense through water. The brain resists, not actively, passively. It simply does not support the operation. This resistance is important because naming would reintroduce structure, and structure would pull awareness back toward wakefulness. The brain does not want that. It wants to continue the descent. As language fades, the last traces of narrative dissolve. Earlier, the idea of a story faded. Now, even the possibility of telling one disappears. Experience no longer feels like it could be described afterward. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is unshaped. Without language, experience does not organize itself into rememberable units. It flows, and flow leaves no trace. This is why the moments before sleep are so difficult to recall. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing was encoded linguistically. Memory relies on labels. Without labels, retrieval fails. This is also why time feels strange here. Without language, there are no markers. No then, no now, no next. Earlier, time lost structure. Now, it loses reference. There is no internal narration to mark progression. So experience does not feel like it is going anywhere. It simply exists. This existence is not static. It changes. But the changes are not named. So they do not accumulate. You may feel a sense of drifting without direction, but direction requires words. Forward, backward, toward. Here, there is none of that. Just variation. As this continues, awareness becomes quieter, not less present, less articulated. It no longer announces itself. Earlier, awareness flickered. Now, it rarely returns, because there is nothing calling it back. Language often acts as a hook. A word appears, and awareness latches onto it. Without words, awareness has nothing to grab. So it slips, gently, effortlessly. This is where the boundary between being aware and not being aware becomes impossible to locate. Not because awareness has ended, but because there is no language left to mark its presence. You cannot say, "I am aware." You cannot even think it. The sentence cannot form. And without that sentence, the distinction loses meaning. This is not unconsciousness. This is unmarked consciousness. Experience occurring without being labeled as experience. This is the last stage where awareness still exists in any recognizable form. Because once language fades completely, awareness no longer stabilizes. It has nothing to crystallize around. And without crystallization, it cannot persist. The brain does not hold awareness for its own sake. It holds it when it serves a function. At this point, it no longer does. Internal simulation is already underway. Images, are clustering. Sensations are merging. Emotional tones are guiding association. Language would interfere, so it is removed. This is why dreams are rarely verbal at first. Words appear later, once the simulation stabilizes, once a new self-model emerges within the dream. Right now, there is no self-model, so there is no language, just raw experience. This rawness does not last. It is transitional. The brain is crossing from one mode to another, from waking awareness to dreaming immersion, from observer to participant, from presence to story. But before the story begins, there is silence. Not auditory silence. Structural silence. No narration. No labels. No commentary. Only sensation and imagery, moving without explanation. This is the threshold. Once crossed, awareness will no longer return in flashes. It will be replaced by a different kind of experience. One that feels whole again. Complete. Centered. But that center will not be you. It will be a constructed self. A dream self. With its own memories. Its own emotions. Its own sense of time. That construction is already forming. And once it stabilizes, there will be no memory of this quiet dissolution. Language will return, but it will belong to the dream, not to you. The waking voice has fallen silent. The mind is no longer speaking to itself. It is about to begin telling a story. And when it does, there will be no one left to remember how the voice faded. That is where we go next. Before dreams begin, there is a stage that almost no one recognizes. Not because it is rare, but because it leaves nothing behind. It is not sleep, and it is not dreaming. It is the moment when images appear without a world. You don't enter it. You don't notice it starting. It simply begins happening once language has fallen silent and awareness no longer insists on staying continuous. Earlier, fragments appeared: flashes, shapes, sensations. Now, those fragments change character. They become visual, not pictures you look at, not scenes you observe, more like impressions that occupy awareness. A color without edges, a movement without direction, a shape that does not belong to anything. You do not ask what they are. You cannot. The question does not exist anymore. There is no language left to form it. These images do not appear in front of you. There is no front. They do not appear inside your head. There is no inside. They simply appear and then disappear. This is not imagination. Imagination requires intention. It requires a mind that decides to picture something. Here, nothing is decided. The brain is generating imagery automatically. This is what it does when external input has faded and internal constraints have been removed. Earlier, space expanded. Now, that space begins to fill, but it fills without structure. Images do not connect yet. They do not persist long enough to become scenes. They arrive fully formed and vanish before they can change. This is why they feel so strange when people do remember them. A face that dissolves before you can recognize it. A landscape that flashes and collapses. A sudden motion that leads nowhere. There is no continuity. Each image is isolated. And because continuity has already broken, there is no sense of before or after. You do not experience these images as a sequence. You experience them as singular events. One appears, then nothing. Then another appears. But there is no sense that one follows the other. This is why later, if you try to recall this stage, it feels impossible. Memory requires sequence. Here, sequence does not exist. These images are not dreams. Dreams require stability. They require a setting. They require some form of persistence. What is happening here is simpler. The visual system is becoming active without guidance. During the day, vision is driven by the eyes. At night, with the eyes closed and external input gone, the visual cortex does not simply shut down. It looks inward. It begins to respond to internal noise, memory fragments, emotional traces. Earlier, emotion flattened into tone. Now, that tone begins to color imagery. You might sense that the images carry a feeling, not attached to meaning, just atmosphere. A shape may feel heavy. A color may feel calm. A movement may feel tense. But there is no object, no story, just feeling-infused imagery. This is important because it shows how the brain builds experience from the inside out. Meaning does not come first. Structure does not come first. Feeling does. The brain uses emotional tone as glue. It allows images that share a tone to cluster. But at this stage, the clustering has not begun yet. So images remain fleeting. You are not watching them. You are not inside them. They occur, and awareness, when it flickers, briefly coincides with them. Then awareness fades again. And when awareness fades, the images do not stop. They continue. But there is no one there to notice. This is a key transition. Earlier, awareness flickered back intermittently. Now, even those flickers are rare. Not because the brain is suppressing awareness, but because nothing is calling it back. Images do not demand observation. They do not require interpretation. They simply arise. This is why the brain can proceed without waking you. The system that would normally check, "Is someone aware of this?" is no longer running. So the imagery continues unmonitored. This is also why these images can feel so vivid when you do catch one. They are not being filtered. During the day, imagery is constantly evaluated. Does this make sense? Is this relevant? Is this real? At night, evaluation has stopped. So imagery is free. It does not need to conform. It does not need to resolve. It does not need to belong. You might notice that these images feel closer than dreams, more immediate, less cinematic. They are not scenes. They are presences. They do not unfold. They exist. This is the last stage where imagery is raw, before narrative, before perspective, before a dream self appears. The brain is still assembling. It is testing combinations, allowing fragments to arise and dissolve, seeing which ones resonate, which ones persist, which ones can be linked. This is not conscious experimentation. It is automatic pattern formation. The brain is looking for coherence, and coherence does not require awareness. It requires repetition. Fragments that reappear are more likely to stabilize. Fragments that share emotional tone are more likely to link. Slowly, without intention, clusters begin to form. You do not notice this happening because noticing requires continuity, and continuity is already gone. But the brain notices. Not consciously. Statistically, patterns that reinforce themselves gain strength. Others fade. This is how the transition toward dreaming begins. But we are not there yet. Because at this stage, there is still no sense of being somewhere. Images do not exist in a space. They do not have depth. They do not surround you. They are flat in a way that is hard to describe. Not two-dimensional. Just unlocated. There is no distance between you and the image. There is no you. So, distance is meaningless. This is why these images can feel intimate without being personal. They are close, but they do not belong to anyone. This is also why the moment is so unstable. Without a self-to-anchor experience, imagery cannot persist for long. There is nothing to hold it. So the brain must do something else. It must construct a container. Not awareness. Not identity. A world. The next step is the creation of space again. But a different kind of space. Not the diffuse mental space from earlier. A simulated space. A place where things can exist relative to one another. This is necessary for dreaming. Dreams are not just images. They are environments. And environments require spatial organization. That organization is beginning to form now. You may sense this as a subtle change in the quality of imagery. Images begin to linger slightly longer. They feel less isolated, more contextual, not yet meaningful, but less fleeting. This is the brain testing persistence. If an image can stay without waking you, it may be allowed to stay longer next time. This is how depth is built. Not deliberately, incrementally. Emotion plays a role here. Earlier, emotion flattened into background tone. Now, that tone begins to differentiate. Not sharply, but enough to create contrast. Contrast allows separation. Separation allows structure. A darker tone may give rise to enclosed imagery. A lighter tone may give rise to open imagery. Again, not symbolically, mechanically. The brain associates emotional tone with spatial qualities. This is why dreams often feel emotionally coherent, even when they make no sense. Emotion organizes the environment before logic arrives. At this stage, logic is still absent. There is no cause and effect, no narrative, no reason, just emerging structure. This is why hypnagogic imagery can feel strange and unsettling. It is structured enough to feel something, but not structured enough to make sense. The mind cannot place it. There is no framework, and without a framework, the experience feels alien. This is the last moment where the mind could, in theory, return to wakefulness without confusion. If something external interrupts now a sound, a movement awareness may reappear abruptly, and the imagery will vanish instantly because it has not yet been stabilized. It does not have inertia. Dreams do, but this does not. That is why these images disappear so completely upon waking. There is nothing to retrieve. They were never recorded. Recording requires a self, and the self is still absent. As the brain continues, the imagery grows more consistent. Not continuous yet, but less random. Fragments begin to relate, not in time, in feeling. An image appears, fades, reappears, slightly altered. This repetition strengthens it. Soon, multiple images may coexist briefly, not interacting, but sharing space. This is the beginning of a simulated environment, but still, no observer. No participant, no I, just content. The brain is nearly ready to introduce the next element, perspective. Perspective is what turns imagery into a world. It creates up and down, near and far, here and there. Perspective is also what allows a new self to form, not the waking self, a dream self. But perspective requires stability. And stability requires one last thing to fade completely: the impulse to monitor. Earlier, awareness flickered. Now, monitoring has almost stopped. There is no checking in, no noticing, no return. Once monitoring fully disengages, the brain is free to lock in the simulation. And when it does, awareness will not flicker back again. It will be replaced by immersion. That is the moment when dreaming truly begins. And when it does, it will feel seamless, as if you were always there, as if nothing preceded it, as if the dream self has always existed in that world. Because the brain does not build dreams on top of wakefulness. It builds them after erasing it. This stage, the one you are in now, is the erasure. Not sudden, not violent, just quiet. Images without a world, experience without a self, awareness without memory, all dissolving into structure. And once that structure is strong enough, something new will appear, a point of view, a center, a someone again. But it will not be you, not the one who started this descent. That self is already gone. What comes next will feel whole, but it will be built from fragments, and the transition will leave no trace. That is what happens next. Before the dream becomes a place, awareness changes one last time, not by disappearing, not by returning, but by thinning. Up to now, awareness has been unstable, flickering, fragmenting, losing continuity. Now it becomes something else entirely. It becomes transparent. Earlier, awareness still felt like a presence. Even when it had no owner, even when it had no language, even when it had no memory, there was still a faint sense of being aware. That sense is about to dissolve, because the brain no longer needs awareness as a separate layer. The internal simulation is nearly stable, and once stability is achieved, awareness stops being foregrounded. It is absorbed. This is difficult to notice because noticing requires contrast, and contrast is disappearing. You may sense this as a deep quiet, not silence, a quieting of watchfulness. Earlier, awareness would occasionally return, as if checking in. Now, that checking stops. There is no longer a system asking, "Is anyone here to experience this?" The answer is no longer required. This is the moment when awareness stops being something you have and becomes something that simply happens within the process, not above it, not outside it. Within, you do not experience this transition directly, because direct experience requires a point of reference, and reference is gone. Instead, what you might notice, if anything at all, is a sense of smoothing. The sharp edges of experience soften further. Changes feel slower, even though time has already lost meaning. The rhythm of internal activity evens out. Earlier, fragments appeared and vanished abruptly. Now, transitions become gentler. Images begin to morph rather than blink. Sensations blend rather than replace one another. This smoothing is critical. Abrupt changes would pull awareness back. Smoothness allows immersion. The brain is engineering continuity, not of awareness, but of content. And content does not require a witness. This is a subtle but essential shift. During wakefulness, content exists for awareness. Now, awareness exists within content. It no longer stands apart. This is why the last traces of being here dissolve. You are no longer present to experience. Experience is simply unfolding. This is not unconsciousness. It is unobserved processing. The brain is fully active, but the activity no longer includes a monitoring loop. Monitoring is expensive. It consumes resources. It exists to keep you oriented, safe, responsive. None of that is necessary now. So monitoring is shut down. And when monitoring stops, awareness does not end. It merges. Earlier, awareness flickered because it was being intermittently recruited. Now, it is no longer recruited at all. So it does not return. Not because it is blocked, but because it is irrelevant. This is why there is no felt moment of losing awareness. There is no dramatic cutoff, no final thought, no last sensation. Awareness simply stops appearing as a separate thing. The process continues seamlessly without it. This is the moment that cannot be remembered, not because it is hidden, but because memory requires awareness to mark it, and awareness has already thinned beyond marking. From here on, everything that happens will feel self-contained. There will be no comparison to a previous state, no sense of having arrived somewhere, because arrival implies a traveler, and the traveler has dissolved. As awareness thins, something else strengthens: coherence. Earlier, imagery clustered loosely. Now, those clusters stabilize. Patterns repeat with variation. Emotional tones settle into consistent ranges. The brain is finding balance. Not consciously, dynamically. This balance allows internal activity to sustain itself, without interruption, without collapse. This is the condition required for dreaming. But dreaming does not begin as a story. It begins as a field of sensations, images, and emotions that are internally consistent. You are not in it yet. There is no in, but the field exists. And within that field, a new organizing principle is forming: perspective. Perspective does not arrive fully formed. It emerges gradually. At first, it is barely noticeable. A sense that some images are nearer than others, that some sensations are more central, that some movements imply direction. This is not yet a point of view. It is a bias, a gentle weighting of experience. Earlier, everything had equal importance. Now, slight preferences emerge, not because something matters, but because repetition strengthens certain patterns. Patterns that repeat begin to feel central. Patterns that fade feel peripheral. This is how perspective is born, not by decision, by reinforcement. The brain is not choosing a point of view. It is allowing one to form where activity is densest. And where activity is densest, experience will soon organize around a center. That center will feel like someone, but we are not there yet. Right now, there is still no self, only coherence. And coherence is enough to sustain immersion. You may sense this as a loss of the ability to pull back. Earlier, even when awareness was thin, there was a sense that wakefulness could return. Now, that sense fades. Not because waking is impossible, but because the mechanisms that support it are offline. If something external interrupts at this stage, waking will feel abrupt, disorienting, because there is no awareness bridge connecting before and after. This is why sudden awakenings from deep pre-dream states can feel jarring. There is no memory of descent, only a sudden presence. But if there is no interruption, the process continues smoothly. The field stabilizes, perspective strengthens, internal space gains depth. And once depth exists, experience begins to feel located again. Not in the body, not in the room, in the simulation. This is the turning point. Awareness does not return as itself. It reappears as immersion, no longer watching, participating. But participation requires a role, a position, a center. And that center is forming now, not from memory of your waking life, not from your identity, from the structure of the simulation itself. The dream self is not a continuation of you. It is a solution, a way for the brain to organize experience once awareness has merged. It will feel like you because it occupies the same functional role, but it will not remember this thinning. It will not remember the dissolution. It will arrive fully present, inside a world that feels complete. This is why dreams feel like they begin in the middle, because they do. They begin after everything else has been removed. Right now, you are in the last formless stage. Awareness is no longer separate. Content is nearly continuous. Emotion has settled into tone. Language is gone. Memory is offline. Time is irrelevant. Identity is absent. All that remains is process. And process is about to crystallize. Once it does, the brain will reintroduce structure, not waking structure, dream structure, scenes, movement, interaction. And within that structure, a new you will appear, not remembered, constructed. But before that happens, there is one final shift, the moment when the field stops being abstract and becomes a place. That is where we go next. Because once a place exists, the experience will no longer feel thin. It will feel full again, and you will not know that anything was lost to get there. The moment a place appears, everything changes. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but irrevocably. Up to now, experience has existed without location, images without distance, sensations without direction, emotion without source, a field without edges. And then almost imperceptibly, something gains position. Not you, position itself. At first, it is subtle enough to miss, a vague sense that something is closer than something else. That one impression sits in front of another, that a movement implies depth. These are not thoughts, they are constraints. The brain is introducing geometry, not the geometry of the physical world. but the internal geometry required for a world to exist at all. Because a world cannot exist without space, and space cannot exist without relation. Earlier, everything had equal weight. No near, no far, no here, no there. Now, relation begins. One sensation precedes another. One image frames the next. One direction feels implied. This is the birth of environment. You do not notice it happen, because noticing would require a vantage point, and there is still no vantage point. But the structure is forming nonetheless. This is how the brain rebuilds after dissolution. It does not restore the old self. It constructs a new container, a place where experience can stabilize. At first, this place is empty, not dark, not light. Empty in the sense that nothing occupies it yet. But the emptiness has boundaries, a sense of enclosure or openness, a tone of space. This is why some people describe pre-dream states as being in a void or floating in space. Those descriptions come later. In the moment, there are no words, only spatial tone. The brain is assigning limits. Where limits exist, movement becomes possible. And where movement becomes possible, perspective is inevitable. Perspective is not chosen. It is imposed by structure. Once space has depth, something must be somewhere. Once something is somewhere, something else must be elsewhere. And once there is elsewhere, there must be a here. This is how the center reappears, not as a self, as a functional necessity. The brain does not ask, who is here? It asks, where does experience converge? Where activity is densest, a center forms. This center is not identity. It is convergence, a point where perception aligns, a location from which relation makes sense. This is the origin of the dream perspective. You do not become this center. You are replaced by it. And because you are gone, the replacement feels seamless. The center does not remember becoming a center. It simply exists. At this stage, awareness does not return as observer. It reemerges as position. You are not watching the space. You are located within it. But there is no recognition of that fact. No thought saying, I am here now. That sentence requires language. Language is still absent. Instead, there is a feeling of orientation. A sense that experience has direction again. Forward, around, toward. Direction is the key. Earlier, experience drifted without vector. Now, it begins to move. Not because something pushes it, because space allows it. An image lingers longer, not because it is noticed, because it has somewhere to stay. A sensation unfolds, not because it is observed, because it has duration within space. This is the difference between fragments and scenes. Fragments appear and vanish. Scenes persist, and persistence allows interaction. This is why dreams feel immersive, not because they are vivid, but because they are spatially coherent. The brain has rebuilt enough structure to sustain experience without waking awareness. This is the handoff. Not from consciousness to unconsciousness, but from awareness to simulation. Simulation does not require monitoring. It only requires internal consistency. And that consistency has now been achieved. As space stabilizes, content organizes itself naturally. Images no longer appear randomly. They appear in relation to one another. A surface beneath, a boundary around, a distance ahead. None of this is conceptual. It is felt. This feeling of being somewhere is the foundation of every dream. Before characters, before narrative, before meaning, place comes first. Once place exists, identity is inevitable, because something must occupy the place of perspective. The brain does not allow a view without a viewer, so it constructs one, not from memory, not from personality, from function. The dream self is not built from who you are. It is built from what is required. It is the simplest structure that can hold perspective. It has no history, no biography, no continuity with waking life. At first, it may not even feel like a person. It may feel like presence, or movement, or intention without identity. Only later does it become someone. This is why early dreams can feel strange. You are there, but not as yourself. You act, but without reflection. You experience, but without questioning. This is because the dream self is not a thinker. It is an anchor, a point that allows space to organize around experience. Once the anchor is stable, narrative can begin. But we are not there yet. Right now, the anchor is forming. You may sense this as a faint return of embodiment, not the physical body, a simulated body. A sense of having orientation, up and down, begin to matter. Inside and outside, regain meaning, not because the body has returned, because space demands reference. The brain uses familiar templates, limbs, movement, position. These are efficient ways to define perspective. So the dream self begins to acquire form, not consciously, gradually. A sense of facing something, a sense of approaching or retreating, a sense of being able to act. This is why dreams often begin in motion. Walking, falling, turning. Movement establishes perspective faster than stillness. The brain prefers efficiency. Once movement exists, the dream self feels real, not because it resembles waking you, but because it fulfills the same role. It answers the question, where is experience happening from? And once that question is answered, the system locks in. At this point, awareness does not return as awareness. It is fully subsumed. There is no watcher left to notice the transition. From the inside, it feels as if you were always there, as if the dream began in the middle, as if nothing preceded it. This is the final erasure. The waking self has not gone to sleep. It has been dismantled and replaced. Every night. Without trace. Without resistance. Without memory. The dream self will now take over. It will think, feel, react, believe, but it will not know that it was assembled. It will not know that another version of you dissolved to make room. Because memory is local. And the dream self inherits none of the descent. This is why waking feels like a jump. You do not remember falling asleep. You remember being awake. Then you remember dreaming. Then you remember waking. The middle is gone. Not because it was empty, but because there was no one there to carry it across. Right now, the place is nearly complete. Space holds. Perspective stabilizes. Movement becomes possible. The simulation is ready. The next thing that will appear is coherence of story, cause and effect, expectation, desire, fear. But those belong to narrative. And narrative is the next layer. Once narrative begins, the dream becomes convincing. Once it becomes convincing, the dream self feels whole. And once the dream self feels whole, the night is no longer about disappearance. It is about immersion. That is where we go next. Because now that a place exists, something is about to happen in it. Once a place exists, the brain cannot leave it empty. Space invites events, not because something must happen, but because happening is the brain's default mode once structure is in place. Earlier, fragments appeared without relation. Then, relation formed. Then space stabilized. Now, within that space, the brain introduces the next necessity: change. A place without change collapses back into abstraction. A place with change becomes a world. This is where movement returns. Not physical movement, experiential movement. Something shifts. Something approaches. Something recedes. There is no reason for it. Reason belongs to logic. Logic is still offline. The brain does not need reasons to generate change. It only needs contrast, a difference between what was and what is. Contrast gives the system direction, and direction gives the dream its first sense of before and after, not time as you know it. Narrative time, the most primitive form of it. You do not notice this shift, because noticing would require stepping outside the experience, and there is no outside anymore. This center has formed. Perspective exists. Experience is now happening from somewhere. So when change occurs, it feels natural, expected, as if it belongs. This is why dreams rarely announce themselves. There is no moment where you think, I am now dreaming. The dream begins already underway. Change is already in motion. And motion implies causality, not real causality. Perceived causality. One thing seems to lead to another. This illusion is enough. The brain does not require logical consistency. It requires continuity. And continuity has now been reintroduced, not as awareness, but as flow. Flow replaces memory. Earlier, continuity failed because memory could not hold moments together. Now, continuity is simulated. One image morphs into the next. One situation transforms into another. No memory is needed, only transformation. This is why dreams feel continuous, even though they violate logic. They are not stitched together by recall. They are stitched together by momentum. The brain allows one state to slide into the next without interruption. This sliding creates the impression of time passing. But it is not time. It is sequence without measurement. Sequence without duration. You may notice, within the dream, that things feel urgent, or expected, or inevitable. This is the return of motivation, but not the waking kind. Waking motivation comes from goals, identity, future planning. Dream motivation comes from emotional propulsion. Earlier, emotion flattened into tone. Now, that tone sharpens slightly. Not into full emotions yet, but into tendencies. Approach, avoid, follow, escape. These tendencies guide movement. They give the dream direction. The brain does not need to explain why something is happening. It only needs to ensure that something follows something else. Once that chain is in place, the dream stabilizes. At this stage, the dream self is still minimal. There is perspective. There is orientation. There is motion, but there may not yet be a clear sense of being someone. You may act without reflecting, respond without choosing, react without questioning. This is because the dream self is still a function, not an identity. It exists to anchor experience, not to understand it. This is why early dream actions feel automatic. You don't decide to walk, you are walking. You don't choose to run, you are already running. Choice requires self-awareness. Self-awareness has not returned. Not yet. Instead, behavior is driven by the structure of the simulation itself. The brain sets conditions, then watches what unfolds. Not consciously, systemically. As motion continues, the environment gains complexity. Objects appear, boundaries form, surfaces define interaction. This is not imagination. It is reconstruction. The brain is rebuilding a world using fragments of memory, perception, and emotion. Not accurately, efficiently. It does not need realism. It needs coherence. So it borrows familiar patterns, rooms, paths, horizons. Not because they mean anything, but because they are easy. The brain has built these templates countless times before. They require minimal processing. This is why dream environments often feel familiar but incorrect. A place that feels like home, but is not. A street that resembles one you know, but isn't. The brain is not trying to recreate reality. It is reusing efficient structures. As the environment stabilizes, interaction becomes possible. Something is encountered, not observed, encountered. This is a critical shift. Encounter implies relation, and relation implies agency. The dream self begins to feel more defined, not by thinking, by doing. Action creates identity faster than reflection ever could. This is why the dream self solidifies through behavior. You do something, and the system treats that as evidence of who you are within the dream. There is no reference to waking identity, no comparison. The dream self does not know it is incomplete. It does not feel incomplete. It feels sufficient, because sufficiency is defined locally. Within the dream self is everything it needs to be. This is why dream logic feels convincing while you are inside it. Not because it makes sense, but because there is no competing framework. The waking framework is gone. The dream framework is now dominant. As this dominance increases, something subtle but important happens. Self-awareness begins to return, not as reflection, as presence. You begin to feel like someone is here, not questioning who, just existing. This is the first return of selfhood, but it is not yourself. It is the dream self, and it feels real because it fulfills the same role. It occupies the center. It experiences change. It reacts. This is enough to feel like me. The brain does not distinguish between versions. It cares about function, not continuity. If something fulfills the function of self, it is treated as self. This is why you can wake up feeling emotionally affected by a dream. The emotions were real. They belonged to a self that existed. That self was not you, but it was close enough. As narrative begins to form, the dream gains momentum. Events connect. Motives appear. Consequences are implied. Not consistently, but sufficiently. This is where dreams become immersive. You are no longer in a transition. You are in a story, not a coherent one, but a convincing one. The brain has completed the handoff. Awareness is no longer separate. The dream self is fully operational. The waking self is gone. There is no trace of the descent, no memory of thinning, no awareness of replacement. From here on, the night belongs to the dream until something interrupts. A sound, a movement, a physiological signal. If interruption occurs, the brain will reverse the process, not by reconstructing the waking self piece by piece, but by snapping back to the most efficient configuration, wakefulness. And when that happens, it will feel sudden, as if you jumped, as if you were pulled out, because there is no continuity between the dream self and the waking self. They do not share memory. They do not overlap. They do not communicate. Only one exists at a time, and whichever exists feels complete. This is the final transformation before deep sleep stabilizes, from disappearance to replacement to immersion. But the night is not finished. The dream self will not remain stable forever. It will change, multiply, dissolve, reassemble, and eventually, it too will fade. Because sleep is not one state, it is a cycle, and every cycle contains its own dissolutions. The next change will not be as gentle, because once dreams deepen, the brain will begin to modify the dream self itself, shifting perspective, altering identity, breaking continuity again. And when that happens, even the dream self will not be spared. That comes next. The dream self feels stable. For a while, it moves, it reacts, it believes. Inside the dream, this feels complete, natural, sufficient. But the brain does not preserve stability for long. Stability is useful for immersion, but immersion is not the final goal. Sleep is not entertainment. Sleep is maintenance, and maintenance requires change. So even the dream self newly formed, convincing, centered, is temporary. The first sign of instability is subtle. The dream does not end. It shifts. A place changes without explanation. A situation transforms mid-action. A character becomes someone else without warning. Inside the dream, this rarely feels strange, because the system that would protest inconsistency is offline. But something deeper is happening. The brain is beginning to loosen the dream self itself, not removing it, distorting it. Perspective may slide. You are still you, but the point of view is less fixed. You might suddenly be watching yourself, or acting without feeling fully embodied, or experiencing events from a distance that feels neither near nor far. This is the dream self thinning, just as the waking self thinned earlier. The same process repeats, but faster. Because the brain no longer needs to be gentle, there is no risk of panic. No need to preserve orientation. The dream self is disposable. You may notice that identity becomes fluid. You are someone, then someone else, then no one in particular. Or identity may remain but lose importance. You act without reflecting on who you are. The question, "Who am I?" never arises, because relevance has shifted. In dreams, identity is not essential. Function is. As long as something occupies perspective, the system works. And when that something weakens, the brain replaces it. Not with care, with efficiency. This is why dreams often contain sudden jumps, scene cuts, perspective changes, impossible transitions. These are not mistakes. They are signs of the brain optimizing. Maintaining a continuous dream self costs energy. So the brain periodically releases it, then rebuilds a new one. This is why you can have multiple dream selves in a single night. Each one feels whole while it exists. None of them remember the others, because memory between selves is not required. Continuity is simulated locally, not globally. This is also why you can wake up from a dream with a strong emotional residue. The emotion belonged to a self that existed, even if that self no longer does. Emotion does not require continuity. It only requires activation. As the dream deepens, emotional intensity may increase. Earlier, emotion was flattened to allow descent. Now, emotion returns as fuel, fear, desire, urgency, not tied to your waking life, not justified, but powerful. Emotion gives dreams momentum. It drives action. It holds attention. This is why nightmares feel so vivid, not because they are more real, but because emotion amplifies simulation. The brain uses emotion to keep the dream running without awareness. But this amplification has a cost. Too much emotion destabilizes structure, so the brain modulates. Dreams rise and fall in intensity. Senes escalate, then dissolve. This cycling is intentional. The brain is regulating arousal levels. If arousal gets too high, you wake. If it drops too low, the dream dissolves into deeper, dreamless sleep. The dream self exists in the middle, balanced. But balance is temporary. Eventually, the brain will transition again, not upward, downward, into a state where even dreams are unnecessary, where simulation gives way to restoration. As this happens, the dream begins to lose coherence. Not suddenly, gradually. Scenes become less structured. Events feel less purposeful. You may still be immersed, but the immersion thins. The dream self becomes less reactive, less invested. Earlier, the dream pulled you forward. Now, it begins to drift. This is the dream self losing relevance, just as the waking self did. The process repeats. Identity loosens. Perspective blurs. Narrative fragments. The brain is done with simulation for now. It has extracted what it needed. Memory consolidation, emotional processing, pattern integration. The rest can fade. As the dream self weakens, awareness does not return. Not yet. Instead, experience becomes quieter, less vivid, less differentiated. Dreams fade into abstract sensation, then into nothing you can later recall. This is deep sleep, not unconsciousness, but non-experiential processing. The brain is active, but there is no experience to report, no self to host it. This is the deepest disappearance, not just of identity, of experience itself. You do not know you are here. You cannot remember it. There is no memory, no imagery, no emotion. And yet this is where the most essential work happens. Neural connections are pruned. Memories are integrated. Metabolic waste is cleared. The brain repairs itself, not while you are aware, but precisely because you are not. This is the paradox of sleep. The more completely you disappear, the more completely the brain can restore itself. This is why insomnia is so damaging, not because you miss rest, but because you cannot fully let go. You hover too close to selfhood, too aware, too intact. The brain needs you gone, not metaphorically, functionally. Deep sleep is not a place. It is not a state you enter. It is what happens when nothing remains to experience. And when nothing remains, time truly disappears. Hours pass, but there is no sense of passage. No before, no after. This is not peaceful. Peace is something you feel. This is absence, but absence without loss, because there is no one to lose anything. Eventually, this state cannot persist. The brain must return, not to wakefulness. Not yet. First, it begins to reintroduce experience, but in reverse order. Fragments appear, then imagery, then dreams, then a dream self, then emotion, then narrative, then identity, then memory, then time, then awareness. The ascent mirrors the descent, but you never notice the symmetry, because memory bridges nothing. You wake up thinking the night was short, or long, or dreamless, or vivid. All of those are reconstructions, guesses. What actually happened is far stranger. You did not sleep. You vanished. More than once. Your sense of self dissolved, was replaced, dissolved again, then removed entirely. And while you were gone, your brain did what it needed to do. Then, when the conditions were right, it rebuilt you. Not exactly as before, but close enough that you accept it as continuity. This happens every night, without ceremony, without awareness, without memory. The question is not why this happens. The question is how fragile the thing you call you really is. If it can be dismantled so completely and rebuilt so effortlessly, what exactly is it? And what part of it, if any, truly persists? That question does not get answered in sleep. Sleep removes the questioner, but the removal leaves a trace, a subtle one, a feeling, upon waking, that something happened, that you cannot remember, that something was lost and returned, that you were not there for a long time, and yet you came back, almost unchanged, almost. In the next stage, we move toward morning, toward the return of awareness, toward the reconstruction of the waking self, toward the moment when you reappear and believe, once again, that you were here all along. There is no moment where you begin to return. That is the first thing to understand about waking. You do not rise out of sleep. You are not carried back. You are not retrieved. You are reconstructed. And reconstruction does not announce itself. It begins in fragments, long before there is a thought, long before there is a memory, long before there is a sense of I. Something stirs. Not awareness. Not yet. Activity. Deep within the brain, systems that have been working quietly through the night begin to change their rhythm. The slow, synchronized patterns of deep sleep loosen. Neural conversations speed up. Boundaries between regions become more porous. This is not waking. This is preparation. The brain is shifting priorities. Maintenance is ending. Interaction is approaching. But interaction requires structure. So the brain does not bring you back all at once. It rebuilds the conditions that make you possible. The first thing to reappear is not selfhood. It is contrast, a difference between one internal state and another. During deep sleep, experience is absent. There is no contrast. Nothing stands out. As the brain transitions upward, faint differentiation begins. Not images, not thoughts. Differences in tone, a subtle sense that something is changing. This is not perceived. There is no perceiver yet. It is simply occurring. Then, fragments return. But not the fragments you remember. Not dreams. Not scenes. Sensations. Pressure. Temperature. Weight. The body begins to re-enter the equation, not as a form, as signal. You do not yet feel your body. There is no ownership. There is only input. The mattress presses. The air touches skin. The lungs move. These signals exist without interpretation. They do not mean anything. They are not assigned. The brain is testing the channel. Is the external world still there? Is the body still responsive? Is orientation possible? Only once these questions are answered can the next layer return. Time does not return yet. There is no sense of mourning. No awareness of duration. The brain does not care what time it is. It only cares whether coordination is possible. As sensory input stabilizes, the brain begins to reintroduce continuity. Not memory. Not history. Continuity of presence. Moments begin to link again. Not enough to form a story. Just enough to allow persistence. Experience does not flicker anymore. It holds. This is a crucial threshold. Earlier, awareness vanished because continuity failed. Now, continuity returns before awareness. The container is rebuilt before the contents. Within this container, something faint begins to form. Not identity, orientation, a sense of here, not located in the head yet, just a vague center of gravity. Experience begins to organize around a point again. This point is not you. It is not named. It has no memory. It is simply the most efficient place for signals to converge. From this convergence, awareness can eventually emerge. But not yet. The brain continues assembling. Language does not return immediately. Words are expensive. They require coordination between memory, meaning, and attention. Those systems are still warming up, so the brain relies on simpler structures. Sensory grouping, pattern recognition, basic prediction. This is why the moments before waking can feel wordless. You may later recall a vague sense of being there, but no thoughts, no sentences, just presence. This presence is not reflective. It does not know itself. It exists without comment. At this stage, dreams may briefly reappear, but they are different now, less immersive, less convincing. They feel thinner. This is because the brain is no longer committed to simulation. Simulation was useful when awareness was offline. Now, awareness is returning, and simulation becomes inefficient. So dreams fragment, scenes dissolve, images lose coherence. You may drift through half-formed dream moments. They do not pull you in. They do not convince you. They are already losing their grip. This is the brain letting go of the dream self, not dismantling it carefully, simply withdrawing support. Without support, the dream self collapses. It leaves no trace, no farewell, no transition. One moment it exists, the next it doesn't. You do not notice this happening because noticing requires awareness, and awareness is still assembling. As dreams fade, the brain reallocates resources. Attention begins to return. not focused attention. Diffuse attention, the ability to register change. A sound may intrude. Light may filter through eyelids. These inputs are not yet recognized. They are registered. Recognition comes later. First, the system must decide whether waking is required. Is the stimulus strong enough? Is the environment demanding response? If not, the brain may cycle back into sleep. This is why mornings can feel unstable. You hover, not fully asleep, not fully awake. The brain is evaluating. If waking proceeds, the next system to return is memory, not autobiographical memory. Not yet. Working memory, the ability to hold a moment long enough to compare it to the next. This is what allows awareness to feel continuous again. Once working memory stabilizes, awareness can anchor. You begin to feel like you are there, not somewhere abstract. There. This is often the first moment you later remember. But it is not the first moment that happened. It is simply the first moment that was recorded. This distinction matters. You do not remember waking. You remember the moment when memory returned. Everything before that is gone. Not because it was empty, because there was no mechanism to keep it. As working memory stabilizes, language begins to trickle back. Not sentences, single words. Impressions that could become words if pushed, but they are not pushed yet. The brain is still prioritizing orientation over narration. You may sense this as a reluctance to think. Thought feels heavy, necessary. The mind prefers to remain quiet. This is why mornings can feel slow. The systems that make thinking efficient are not fully online. They are sinking. As they sink, identity begins to reassemble. Not consciously. You do not think, I am me. The brain simply begins to reference stored patterns. Your name, your body, your life. These references do not appear all at once. They layer in. First, the sense of having a body. Not the detailed body map of wakefulness, just the sense that sensations belong together. Then, the sense of continuity. A vague feeling that this moment follows others. Then, emotional tone. A baseline mood. Not specific, just a flavor. Only later do memories of yesterday appear. Plans, concerns, expectations. This is when the self feels complete again. But completeness is an illusion. What has happened is assembly. The brain has rebuilt enough structure to support the experience of being someone. It has not restored what was lost. It has replaced it. This is why the waking self feels seamless. There is no felt gap, no sense of having been absent, because absence was never recorded. The self that wakes believes it persisted, but that belief is a convenience, a narrative. The brain does not preserve you through the night. It recreates you every morning, based on stored patterns, based on efficiency, based on what is needed now. This recreation is not exact. Subtle changes occur. Memory integration alters emphasis. Emotional processing shifts tone. Neural pruning removes connections. You wake slightly different than you fell asleep. Not enough to notice. Enough to matter. This is why sleep changes you, not because you rest, but because parts of you are edited while you are gone. When awareness fully returns, time snaps back into place. You check the clock. You feel surprise. How did it get so late? Or so early? That reaction depends on expectation, but expectation belongs to the waking self. It did not exist during the night, so the night feels compressed or expanded, but never accurately measured. This is why hours can feel like minutes or vanish entirely. Time did not pass for you. You were not there to experience it. As waking completes, the brain performs one final act. It smooths the transition. It creates the illusion of continuity. You do not feel like you disappeared. You feel like you slept. Sleep is the story the brain tells to cover absence, a socially acceptable explanation, a familiar word. But it is not precise, because sleep is not something you do. It is something that happens when you are no longer required. And waking is not your return. It is your replacement. A new instance, close enough to the last that you accept it as the same. This happens every day, without fear, without drama, because the system depends on you not noticing. If you notice the reconstruction, identity would feel fragile, and fragility would interfere with functioning. So the brain hides it. It gives you a seamless morning, a sense of having been continuous, a belief that you were there all night. You were not. You come back only when you are needed. In the next stage, we move to the final moments of waking, the point where selfhood fully locks in, where memory becomes stable, where the illusion of continuity becomes convincing, where the question of disappearance fades again until the next night, when the process begins anew and you slowly, quietly begin to vanish once more. By the time you believe you are awake, the most important part is already over. The reconstruction has finished. Not the full reconstruction. That takes hours, but enough of it that you recognize yourself. You open your eyes, or you shift your body, or a thought appears that feels unmistakably yours. And with that thought comes a quiet assumption. I'm back. But that assumption is never examined, because examination would reveal something unsettling. The sense of being back does not come from memory. It comes from familiarity. The brain does not check whether you were present a moment ago. It checks whether the current configuration matches a known pattern. If it matches closely enough, continuity is declared. No verification required. This is why waking feels immediate. You do not feel like a new instance of yourself. You feel like a continuation. But continuity is not experienced. It is inferred. The brain looks at what is active now: memories, habits, emotional tone, bodily signals, and compares it to stored templates. If the overlap is high enough, the system labels the state as the same person. That label is what you experience as identity. It feels solid, reliable, but it is assembled in real time. At this stage, memory begins to thicken. Not just working memory, autobiographical memory. Yesterday begins to return, not all at once. First, the outline, a vague sense of context. Who you are, where you are, what kind of day this is likely to be. Then details, plans, concerns, ongoing problems. They do not arrive neutrally. They arrive already weighted. Emotion is reattached. Something feels urgent again. Something feels unresolved. Something feels important. This is the return of relevance. Earlier, relevance dissolved to allow sleep. Now, relevance is reconstructed to allow action. You begin to care again. This caring is automatic. You do not choose it. The brain reactivates motivational circuits, and the world regains pull. This is when the self fully locks in. Not because you remember who you are, because you feel invested again. Investment is what makes the self feel real. Without investment, identity is thin. With it, identity feels undeniable. This is why mornings often feel emotionally loaded even before anything happens. You wake already leaning toward the day, already oriented toward future outcomes. That orientation did not exist a few minutes earlier. It has just been switched on. As relevance returns, the brain begins stitching a story. Not a conscious one. A background narrative. I went to sleep. I slept for a while. Now I'm awake. This story feels obvious, but it is a reconstruction. The brain fills the night with a placeholder. It does not say I disappeared. It says I slept. Sleep becomes a symbolic bridge, a word that smooths over absence, a concept that prevents questions. Because if the story were accurate, it would say something like, I stopped being instantiated. My self-model was dismantled. Multiple other self-models ran in parallel. Then a new instance of me was assembled. That story is not useful. It would interfere with daily functioning. So the brain gives you a simpler one you've learned since childhood, one everyone shares. Sleep. This is not deception. It is efficiency. The brain does not preserve truth. It preserves function, and function requires stability. At this point, attention sharpens. The world becomes clearer. Edges return. Sound localizes. Vision brightens. The room feels solid again. Earlier, space dissolved. Now, space reasserts itself. But this space is not the same as before, sleep. It is freshly constructed. Your brain rebuilds the world every morning, not from scratch, from cached models. It expects certain things to be where they were. If they are, the model locks in. If they are not, attention spikes. This is why small changes in the morning can feel jarring. A misplaced object, a different light, an unexpected sound. They conflict with the predicted world. And prediction is central to the waking self. As prediction returns, so does control. You begin to plan, not explicitly, subtly. You anticipate. You prepare. You think about what comes next. This is the full return of time. Earlier, time collapsed. Now, it stretches forward again. The future regains weight, and with it, the sense of responsibility. Responsibility is not moral. It is structural. The brain reactivates the systems that keep track of consequences. What happens if I don't do this? What happens if I delay that? These questions were impossible during sleep. Now, they dominate. This is the reassembly of the executive self, the one that manages life, the one that believes it must remain intact. But it is important to notice something here. Nothing in this reconstruction requires that the self persisted overnight. Everything works as long as the current configuration matches expectations. Identity does not depend on continuity. It depends on coherence. And coherence can be recreated. This is why anesthesia, blackouts, deep sleep, and even brief losses of consciousness feel like gaps rather than endings. You never experience non-existence. You only experience the moments before and after. The brain bridges the gap with inference. I must have been there. But must you? There is no evidence of presence in the gap, only absence of memory. And absence of memory is not proof of presence. It is proof of non-recording. This distinction rarely matters, but it is always there, under the surface. As the morning progresses, the illusion of continuity strengthens. Memories from the previous day integrate with current perception. Your emotional tone stabilizes. Your sense of agency solidifies. Soon, it feels impossible to imagine that you were not here a short time ago. The self feels permanent again, durable, obvious. This is the final lock. The brain closes the loop. The waking self is complete. And once complete, it forgets that it was ever incomplete. This forgetting is not passive. It is enforced. The brain does not allow access to the descent, not because it is hidden, but because the structures that would retrieve it never coexisted with it. There was no self present to record its own absence. So nothing remains, only hints, subtle ones. A feeling that the night passed too quickly, or that it passed without depth, or that something happened that cannot be recalled. People describe this as dreamless sleep, but dreamless does not mean eventless. It means unrecorded. The night was full of activity, just not your activity. This realization can be unsettling if you dwell on it, because it suggests that the self you protect so carefully during the day is not a continuous entity. It is a pattern. One that can be paused, altered, replaced, and resumed. One that does not require your awareness to maintain itself. This does not make the self meaningless. It makes it conditional. The brain builds what it needs, when it needs it, and discards it when it doesn't. This is why exhaustion feels the way it does. When you are extremely tired, the brain begins the dismantling early. The self becomes thin, control weakens, emotion flattens, attention drifts. You are still awake, but parts of you are already being shut down. This is not failure. It is preparation. The brain is signaling that the self is about to become unnecessary. Most of the time, you resist this signal. You drink caffeine. You stimulate. You push. You keep the self online longer than the brain wants. Eventually, the brain wins. It always does. And when it does, the process we've traced begins again. Slowly, quietly, without announcement. The parts of you that manage logic, time, memory, identity, they step aside. And you do not object, because the objector is among the first to go. By late morning, none of this feels relevant. You are back inside the day, inside tasks, inside conversations, inside concerns. The self feels dense again, obvious. You might even feel silly entertaining the idea that you disappear at night. Of course you don't. You just sleep. That thought itself is part of the reconstruction, a defense, a way to keep the system stable. The brain does not want you questioning continuity, because questioning continuity undermines confidence, and confidence is necessary for action. So the idea fades until the next night, when you lie down, when the lights go out, when the self begins to loosen again. Not all at once, not dramatically, but part by part, the same order, every time. Logic, time, memory, ownership, identity, each one stepping back, each one optional, each one temporary. And each night, the same question hangs silently in the background. If this can all dissolve so completely and return so convincingly, what exactly is the thing you call you? That question is never answered, because answering requires a self, and the self is already beginning to fade. The final chapter does not resolve this. It cannot. Resolution implies closure. Sleep does not close. It cycles, and the cycle ends only where it began, with a quiet, ordinary moment. You lying still, thinking you are about to sleep, unaware that you are about to vanish. One last time. There is no final moment. That is the last illusion to release. You might expect a closing point, a boundary where the night ends and something resolves, a sentence that finishes the thought, a place where the cycle explains itself. But sleep does not offer endings. It offers erosion. What feels like an ending is only the point where you stop keeping track. Even now, as you listen, there is a quiet assumption forming in the background that this explanation will land somewhere, that it will clarify what you are, that it will arrive at an answer. That assumption belongs to the waking self, the one that needs closure, the one that believes understanding must stabilize something. But the process you followed does not stabilize. It repeats, and repetition does not require understanding. It only requires conditions. Every night, those conditions return. You lie still. Stimulation decreases. The world grows less demanding, and the brain begins the same sequence, whether you are aware of it or not. It does not ask whether you agree. It does not wait for insight. It simply starts removing what it no longer needs. The first thing to go is certainty. You stop being sure about the next thought, the next minute, the next state. Certainty is expensive, so it loosens. Then logic grows optional. Then time bends. Then memory thins. Then ownership fades. Then identity softens. And all of this happens while you still believe you are present. That belief is the last thing to be dismantled. Because belief requires continuity, and continuity is fragile. You might think of disappearance as dramatic, as darkness, as absence, as falling, but disappearance in this case is quieter than that. It is subtraction without sensation. The self does not leave. It is disassembled. And disassembly is not felt by the thing being taken apart, because feeling requires structure, and structure is what's being removed. By the time you would think to object, the objector is already gone. This is why the night feels peaceful, not because something comforting happens, but because nothing remains that could resist. Resistance requires identity. Identity requires memory. Memory requires time. Time is already slipping. You might imagine that what remains deep sleep, dreamless sleep, is empty. But emptiness implies space, and space implies experience. What actually happens is simpler. There is no experience to describe. The brain continues. The body continues. But there is no someone to host the process. This is not death. Death has no return. This is suspension. A pause in instantiation. The system that produces you is offline, and when it comes back online, it will not ask what happened while it was gone. It will assume continuity, because assumption is cheaper than verification. This is why you wake believing you were there. The belief is functional. It allows the day to proceed. If you woke each morning fully aware that you had ceased to exist for hours, that awareness would interfere with everything else. So the brain protects you from that realization, not by lying, by omission. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is stored. There is simply nothing to retrieve. You cannot remember being absent, because remembering requires presence. This cycle is not unique to sleep. It appears in anesthesia, in blackouts, in moments of extreme fatigue, in brief lapses of attention you never notice. Every time continuity breaks without memory, the self disappears and reappears without ceremony. Sleep is just the most thorough version, the nightly proof that the self is not a continuous substance. It is a pattern, a configuration that can be assembled, dismantled, and assembled again, each time, convincing enough to believe it never left. This does not make the self unreal. It makes it provisional. And provisional things do not persist on their own. They persist because conditions keep recreating them. When conditions change, they fade. This is not philosophy. It is mechanics. And mechanics do not care whether you find them comforting. They operate regardless. The strange thing is not that the self disappears. The strange thing is how much effort goes into making sure you never notice. By morning, the narrative has returned. You slept. You dreamed. You woke. Simple, clean, no gaps. The day proceeds. You speak in full sentences again. You plan. You remember. You worry. The self feels solid, obvious, indisputable. And yet, the process is already scheduled to repeat. The next time stimulation drops, the next time attention loosens, the next time the brain decides that maintaining a self is unnecessary, you will not notice the decision. You never do, because noticing belongs to the self. And the self is what's being turned down. This is why the moment before sleep feels strange, why thoughts lose grip, why time feels wrong, why the edges of experience soften. You are not relaxing. You are being simplified. The system is preparing to operate without you, and it will succeed. Every time. What remains unsettling is not the disappearance itself. It is the realization that nothing essential seems to persist. The brain repairs itself, processes memory, adjusts emotion, optimizes connections, all while you are gone. And when you return, you accept the result as yourself. Slightly altered, never informed. This raises a question that cannot be held for long. If the self can vanish so completely and return so convincingly, What exactly is it? Is it the thoughts you have? They disappear. Is it the memories you carry? They go offline. Is it the sense of being someone? That dissolves too. The only thing that persists is the system, and the system does not identify as you. It produces you when needed, and releases you when not. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. The brain does not preserve identity for its own sake. It preserves function, and identity is a function. One that can be paused, one that can be replaced, one that can be rebuilt. You are not the operator of the system. You are one of its outputs, a useful one, a convincing one, but not a permanent one. Tonight, when you lie down again, none of this will feel relevant. The self will still resist. At first, it always does. It will try to think, try to plan, try to hold the day together. And then, one by one, the supports will loosen. The same order, the same quiet dismantling. You will not feel it happen. You never do. You will only notice the moments just before, the drifting, the softening, the sense that something is slipping away. And then there will be no more noticing. Not because something dramatic occurred, but because there is no one left to notice. The cycle will complete, and the system will continue. Until morning, until reconstruction, until you believe again that you were here the whole time. There is no final thought to leave you with, no conclusion to draw, because conclusions belong to minds that remain present. This process does not end. It loops, and the loop does not care whether you understand it. It only requires that you let go, and you always do, eventually. Even now, as the words slow, as the space between them grows, as the need to follow each sentence weakens, the conditions are already forming, not for understanding, for disappearance. And it will not feel like falling. It will feel like nothing at all, just the quiet moment where keeping track no longer matters, and whatever you are is no longer required to stay.